Chapter 145. Hearing Xian Yuan Po's words, the examiner's expression instantly changed. He impatiently waved his hand, indicating for him to quickly leave. Xian Yuan Po was stunned. He thought to himself, "Don't tell me I don't need to be declared the winner? Then, does this match count or not?" He glanced at his opponent, who was being resuscitated under the wall, scratched his head, and walked out of the tower in a daze. Hearing the sound of the tower's door closing, the examiner shook his head speechlessly. He thought to himself, "This youngster is only 13 years old. How could he have such great strength? Even if Yao's physique is special, isn't this a bit too exaggerated?" Seeing Xian Yuan Po walk down from the stone steps, the crowd didn't feel too surprised. After all, his name was on the honor roll of Azure Clouds. Defeating that nameless Huangshan Valley disciple was a matter of course. It was just that the examinees didn't think that this match would end so quickly, even faster than the previous 4 scholars from Scholartree Manor. And that thunderous sound, what was going on? That's right, the tower's soundproofing array couldn't isolate all sounds. Once the volume exceeded a certain level, the sound could be transmitted outside the tower. Previously, when Xian Yuan Po sent that Huangshan Valley disciple flying with a punch, the terrifying sound of the impact directly broke through the soundproofing array's restrictions and transmitted into the ears of the examinees outside the tower, triggering countless guesses and discussions. At this time, the examinees that remained on the field were mostly the victors of the first round. They would most likely meet Xian Yuan Po in the second round. Their gazes towards Xian Yuan Po became a bit cautious. "What's the situation?" Tang 36 asked Xian Yuan Po, who was walking back to the woodlands. Even now, Xian Yuan Po still didn't understand what had happened in the previous match in the tower. After thinking for a long time, he gestured and said he didn't block it. The simple and honest Xian Yuan Po couldn't understand how Tang 36 was able to calculate all the details of the match. He thought that Tang 36 was acquainted with that Huangshan Valley disciple and had arranged beforehand for him to win. So at this time, his emotions weren't that excited. Instead, he was a bit confused and at a loss. How could Tang 36 know what he was thinking? Listening to his words, he could roughly guess the details of the match. He sneered and said, "It's not that he didn't block it. It's that he couldn't block it in time. The most important thing in battle is momentum. His strength was originally lower than yours, yet he still wanted to retreat and fight. His loss is inevitable. It's only a matter of time." At this moment, the sounds of discussion in front of the tower of purging dust gradually died down. Because an examinee walked out, he was ranked 61st. This examinee was from the Heavenly Academy. Zhuang Huanyu walked to his side and spoke in a low voice. This examinee from the Heavenly Academy had a cloth bag tied to his back. It was unknown what was inside, but his expression was indifferent. As he listened to Zhuang Huanyu's words, his gaze was fixed in the direction of the Tradition Academy. After Zhuang Huanyu finished speaking, he retreated. The examinee from the Heavenly Academy looked at the people from the Tradition Academy at the edge of the forest. He was silent for a long time and finally chose Chun Changsheng. Yes, he chose Chun Changsheng. It was quiet in front of the tower. Everyone was looking towards the woodlands. This choice was somewhat unexpected, but after careful analysis, it was a matter of course. Su Mo Yu and Tang 36 were respectively ranked 33 and 32 on the proclamation of Azure Clouds, and Luo was ranked second. No matter how hard that Heavenly Academy examinee tried, he couldn't win against these 3 people. Although Chun Changsheng's reputation was great, he was definitely the weakest. That examinee from Heavenly Academy, choosing him could at least guarantee that he had a chance of winning. The Heavenly Academy examinee looked at Chun Changsheng and said, "I don't believe you can win against me." When he said those words, his tone was deliberately calm and his expression was deliberately indifferent, but anyone could hear the viciousness within. The reason for his viciousness was naturally due to his lack of confidence. Only by being viciously could he not think about other things, such as the Ivy League gathering, the proclamation of Azure Clouds, and the 4 words fame throughout the capital. The woodlands were very quiet. Tang 36 looked at Chun Changsheng, wanted to say something, but in the end didn't say anything. He didn't act like he did with Xian Yuan Po, constantly explaining the details that needed to be paid attention to in a battle, or even preparing a battle plan beforehand. This was because even he didn't know what Chen Changsheng's current situation was. In the end, he only asked the simplest of questions. Can you do it? Chen Changsheng looked at the Heavenly Academy examinee and compared it to the information that Minister Xin had secretly sent to Orthodox Academy a few days ago. He remembered that the examinee was called Lu Chongshan, 17 years old this year, a direct disciple of Heavenly Academy's principal, Mao Qiuyu. His cultivation level wasn't bad, at least at the middle stage of the meditation realm, and it was highly likely that he was carrying a powerful magic tool. It shouldn't be a problem. He thought for a while and said to Tang 36. Hearing this, Tang 36's expression immediately relaxed, no longer worrying. He knew that Chen Changsheng was a cautious and calm person. If he said it wouldn't be a problem, then it definitely wouldn't be a problem. Master, use the 1,000-mile button. Luo said in a low voice. She was a little worried. Even if she usually had confidence in Chen Changsheng, or even blindly believed in him, this battle was far too important for Chen Changsheng. With his results in the academic exam, as long as he could defeat this Heavenly Academy examinee, he would have a high chance of entering the top 3 of the Great Trial, gaining the right to enter the Mausoleum of Books. Tang 36 heard her words and thought to himself, what kind of person is this? The 1,000-mile button could be considered a legendary level magic tool. Even against a powerhouse at the upper stage of star fusion, it could save his life. Its preciousness could be imagined, no matter how much a Shio practitioner wanted it. It was hard to obtain. Luo actually wanted Chen Changsheng to use it in a normal battle. Wasn't this too much of a waste? Chen Changsheng looked at Luo and said, it's fine, I can do it. After saying that, he walked towards the tower. Under the guidance of a Li Palace clergyman, he entered through the door with the Heavenly Academy examinee. Looking at the door that was once again tightly shut, the examinees in front of the tower were silent. Their expressions were complex. It was unknown what they were thinking. Within the tower, the round eaves were like the mouth of a well. The blue sky seemed distant. Chen Changsheng and the Heavenly Academy student named Lu Chongshan were also separated by a great distance. They stood on opposite ends of the tower, staring at each other from a distance. I admit that I'm not as knowledgeable as you, but in a battle, true strength is what matters. I really want to know, have you completed your purification? Lu Chongshan looked at him and said with an indifferent expression. His seemingly flat voice, in reality, hid a hint of mockery. Similar to the fierceness hidden within his words earlier, this was also a way for him to increase his confidence. Chen Changsheng wasn't like Xian Yuan Pe, staring at the blue sky in a daze, nor did he look towards the second floor in search of the examiners. From the moment he entered the tower, he had been quietly watching his opponent, focused and calm, slowly releasing his divine sense. True essence flowed through his meridians, unable to flow through them, but able to warm his chest. He replied, I've succeeded. In today's grand examination, a lot of people had either faintly guessed or noticed that he had completed his purification. Furthermore, purification was only the beginning of cultivation. It couldn't be used as a secret weapon. Therefore, there was nothing to hide. Lu Chongshan said, is that so? I remember very clearly, during the Ivy League gathering, you still weren't able to cultivate. Even if you've completed your purification, it should have only been a few days, right? Chen Changsheng thought about it and said, yes, it really hasn't been long. It's only been a few days since you've completed your purification. You definitely don't even know how to meditate. I really want to know, how can you defeat me in this state? Your strength isn't enough. So what if you're famous? Lu Chongshan looked at him and said with a hint of mockery, his right hand reached behind him and untied the cloth bag. From within, he took out an umbrella and opened it in front of him. That umbrella looked like a normal oil paper umbrella. Upon being opened, the surface of the umbrella instantly emitted an innumerable luster, looking like a precious topaz. Within it, an extremely strong aura could be faintly felt circulating. It was obviously not a normal tool. Due to Lu Chongshan's young age, His cultivation wasn't high enough to display the umbrella's full power, but when placed within the environment of the grand examination, there were very few examinees that could rely on their own strength to break through it. This umbrella was originally his trump card. He didn't think that he would encounter Qin Changsheng in the first round. For the sake of safety, he didn't hesitate to use it. Qin Changsheng gave the umbrella a glance, then no longer paid it any attention, returning his attention back to his own body. A small amount of true essence flowed through his broken meridians. A strong divine sense spurred on his mind, causing him to become more and more excited, yet strangely calm. At the same time, an indescribable power was born from the deepest parts of his body, his bones and organs, spreading to every part of his body, bringing with it a feeling of strength. This feeling was very mysterious, hard to describe. It wasn't a feeling of strength due to the strength. It was as if even an insignificant strand of that strength would give one an incomparably strong confidence, more like an instinct. He wasn't unfamiliar with this feeling. That day in the underground space, he had fainted after forcefully meditating. Upon awakening, he found that within his body, there was an additional power, an aura, as well as a feeling of strength and confidence. Because he had never seen that senior black dragon again, he still didn't know what had happened that day. But he knew that his body had undergone an unimaginable change. His speed and strength had received a terrifying increase. Even the most perfect of purification would only be able to do so. Most importantly, no one knew of this change. "Come." Lu Chongshan looked at him and said with an indifferent expression. That oil paper umbrella in front of him exuded a strong aura. His arrival was Qin Changsheng's departure. Qin Changsheng thought about how he should go, how he could go faster. Then he remembered that day when he had jumped onto the snowy ground, leaping towards the lakeside. He raised his right foot, stepping towards the ground. A sound could be heard. That sound was hard to describe. It was as if an anvil that had been heated red by a furnace had suddenly been doused with a basin of water. Qin Changsheng's foot stepped on the ground. The sturdy leather boot instantly ruptured. The yellow sand beneath the boot, as if it was fleeing for its life, scattered in all directions, revealing the actual bare stone floor underneath. Numerous cracks, with his right foot as the center, spread out towards the tower's surroundings. All of this happened in a time that didn't even have the time to blink. There were many Li Palace clergymen in charge of the dueling phase. Amongst these clergymen, some were in charge of the process, some were in charge of invigilation, some were in charge of treating injured examinees, some were in charge of miscellaneous tasks. Not all of them needed to remain within the tower. Previously, there had been many who had been outside the tower, but at this moment, they were all within the tower. They stood on the second floor, silently observing the dueling. They were very curious, the youth from Orthodox Academy that His Eminence had placed such high hopes on. What level of strength did he possess? Was it like the rumors said he didn't know how to cultivate? Or was he like those legendary figures, able to suddenly explode with unimaginable strength? Seeing Qin Changsheng's foot step onto the ground that was covered in yellow sand, seeing what happened afterwards, the expressions of all the Li Palace clergymen on the second floor suddenly changed. This was because the strength displayed by this youth from Orthodox Academy had surpassed all of their imaginations. It wasn't to say that his true essence was abundant. In reality, they could clearly feel that Qin Changsheng's true essence was very ordinary. It could even be said to be rather small, yet he was able to shatter the ground of his holiness miniature world. How did he manage to purify? How could he possess such a terrifying strength? An incomparably terrifying strength was transmitted from the ground back into Qin Changsheng's body. Yellow sand filled the air. His figure broke through the sand, his dark-colored uniform of Orthodox Academy, leaving behind a clear blur, as if he was a black dragon. The Li Palace clergymen could no longer suppress their cries of alarm, resounding from the second floor. Then, they were quickly suppressed by an even sharper, even more mournful howl. This was because Qin Changsheng's speed was too fast, his body's high-speed friction with the air, as if space itself was being torn apart, emitting a sound akin to a dragon's howl. In the blink of an eye, he had arrived before Lu Chongshan. Lu Chongshan didn't have the slightest time to react. He He didn't even have the time to think. Due to his shock, he was only able to open his mouth halfway. Chen Changsheng's fist fell upon that umbrella. That umbrella abruptly emitted countless rays of light, giving rise to a powerful aura. Yet, in the next moment, the rays of light from the umbrella abruptly disappeared, once again becoming dim and lightless, because that powerful aura had been suppressed by an even stronger, even purer force. That powerful force originated from Chen Changsheng's fist. With a crashing sound, that umbrella was carried away by the wind generated by the fist. The fist continued to advance, accurately landing upon Lu Chongshan's chest. With a boom, Lu Chongshan's body bounced up like a stone, rapidly traveling a few dozen meters, heavily smashing upon the sturdy stone wall of the tower. That stone wall still had a few extremely fine cracks. Previously, when Xian Yuanpa had sent that disciple of Huangshan Valley flying with a single punch, that person had smashed upon this wall. Now, Lu Chongshan had once again smashed upon the same spot. Similarly, it was only a single punch. Lu Chongshan spat out blood and fainted. At the start of the match, he had contemptuously said 2 words to Chen Changsheng, "Come." Thus, Chen Changsheng came. Then he collapsed. From start to finish, he had only said those 2 words. He didn't even have the time to make a single move. The tower was deathly silent. Chen Changsheng retracted his fist, straightened his body, then looked towards the second floor. Those clergymen that had been shocked to the point of being absent-minded, upon meeting his gaze, they regained their senses and hurriedly rushed downstairs to save the injured. The Li Palace clergyman that was in charge of the dueling segment walked up to Chen Changsheng, wanted to say something, but in the end, didn't say anything. Chen Changsheng had a calm expression as he clasped his hands in greeting, then turned around and walked out of the tower. Looking at his back, the Li Palace clergyman found it hard to calm his emotions. Thinking to himself, the students of Orthodox Academy, why were they all so simple and crude? This chapter has 4,000 words. This is the only chapter for today. I want to adjust my biological clock. Sleeping at 5 or 6 a.m. every day is a bit unbearable. Chapter 146. One punch, and yet another punch. There were no moves, no magic tools, no true essence to be seen, only strength and speed. What path was this? It had to be known that Orthodox Academy wasn't like this in the past. The Orthodox Academy of the past, both teachers and students had a profound understanding of the Tao. Their actions were otherworldly and had the demeanor of a Taoist. This year, Orthodox Academy's re-enrollment of new students, for many of the older members of the Orthodoxy, this signified many things. They had originally thought that the past decade or so was only a speck of dust in the endless passage of time. Many things hadn't changed. As long as Orthodox Academy was revived, they could once again see its former glory. Who could have guessed? The current Orthodox Academy was no longer the Orthodox Academy they had imagined. Although Xian Yuanpa and Chen Changsheng had won consecutively, Orthodox Academy's former demeanor was no longer there. Thinking up to this point, the Li Palace clergymen and many of the examiners of the tower couldn't help but feel somewhat conflicted. In the air above the hall of Zhao 1, a mirror of light floated. On the lower right corner of the mirror were several green leaves. What was displayed on the mirror was the scene within the tower of purging dust. The people within the hall looked at Chen Changsheng's back as he walked out of the tower. Looking at the door that was slowly closing, they couldn't help but feel the same. Prince Chunlu, an MOU, His Eminence, Archbishop Meili Sha, the headmasters and bishops of the capital's Ivy League schools, Xue Xingchuan and Su Shiji, who had come representing the military, His Excellency Zhou Tong, who was sitting alone in a corner, and a few representatives from the southern sections. At this moment, there were many important figures within the hall of Zhao 1. They were currently looking at Heavenly Academy's principal, Mao Qiuyu. His student had just suffered a crushing defeat at the hands of Chen Changsheng. Some of them even recognized that oil paper umbrella. It was the magic tool that Mao Qiuyu had used to traverse the continent in his youth, thinking to themselves that his current mood must be terrible. Yet, contrary to what they imagined, Mao Qiuyu's face didn't have any signs of anger. His expression was as calm as usual. People didn't see anything on Mao Qiuyu's face. They subconsciously turned their heads to look at His Eminence, the Archbishop, only to find that this elderly eminence still had his eyes closed, as if he was in a deep sleep. This was obviously a display of extreme confidence towards Chun Changsheng and the Tradition Academy. Previously, some people thought that this confidence would be a joke, but who would have thought that Chun Changsheng would actually obtain such a clean victory in the first match? They couldn't help but worry whether or not they would become a joke. Whether it was the examiners within the tower or the VIPs within the Hall of Zhao, when who were watching the match through a mirror, they were all stunned by Chun Changsheng's performance. They couldn't understand this youth from Orthodox Academy had clearly only completed his purification not too long ago. His true essence amount was only average. How could he possess such astonishing strength? His power has nothing to do with the amount of Zhen Yuan. It should be because his purification is quite perfect, or he had some kind of adventure these days. That is pure, absolute power. As the second-ranked divine general of the continent, Xue Xingchuan had experienced hundreds of battles and had a deep understanding of power. Seeing the puzzled expressions of the crowd, he calmly said. As he said those words, he glanced at His Eminence. A perfect purification was extremely rare. If something like adventure was common, then it wouldn't be surprising. In his opinion, no matter what method Chun Changsheng had used to obtain such pure and absolute power, it must have been a fortuitous encounter bestowed by His Eminence. But for Chun Changsheng to be able to accept it and digest it well was also something that wasn't easy. Xue Xingchuan looked towards the indifferent and silent Su Shiji on his left, thinking to himself that such a son-in-law, although he couldn't compare to Qiu Shanjun, he's still not bad. As the two most trusted divine generals of the military by the Divine Empress, he thought to himself, should he advise Su Shiji when it's convenient? Chun Changsheng's unexpected display of strength caused the Hall of Zhao to become silent. After Xue Xingchuan's words, no one spoke for a long time, until Mou's cold voice broke the silence. Relying solely on strength won't be able to go far. The Hall of Zhao once again fell silent. Everyone knew that her words weren't wrong. Without the support of a stage, without a sufficient amount of true essence, no matter how strong one's strength was, it would only be able to display its might in a battle of a lower stage. Once it encountered an opponent of a higher stage, it would be directly crushed. If Chun Changsheng didn't have any other methods, then he definitely wouldn't be able to make it to the end in this duel. It was even highly likely that he would lose in the next round. That mournful howl spread out from the tower. The examinees' expressions suddenly changed, not knowing what had happened within the tower. Gohan Shi and Tian Haishan Xue's expressions became grave. It was obvious that these two young experts that had already achieved ethereal opening had a much clearer perception. It didn't take long for the doors of the tower to open once again, and Chun Changsheng walked out. His right foot was bare. It was unknown where his boot had gone, making him look a little ragged. But apart from that, no traces of an intense battle could be seen on his body. It was as if he had only entered the tower for a stroll. Outside of the tower was a scene of silence. Not a single examinee spoke. Their emotions were complex. Their gazes followed him as he walked down the stone steps, all the way to the woodlands. Not bad. Tang 36 extended his hand and patted him on the shoulder, praising him. Xian Yuanpo looked at him without saying a word, his eyes filled with admiration. Su Mou thought to himself, though that student from Heavenly Academy had an average stage and wasn't considered strong, if he had been the one fighting him, he would have been able to easily win, but it would have been difficult for him to be as fast as Chun Changsheng. It seems that the speculations of his fellow students prior to the grand examination were correct. He had indeed been hiding his strength. Luo happily laughed. Her laughter was as clear and melodious as a silver bell. The young girl wanted to help Chun Changsheng wipe away his sweat, but discovered that he wasn't sweating at all. This made her feel even more proud, thinking to herself that her teacher was indeed not a normal person, just as she had thought a few months ago. She really wanted to know how Chen Changsheng had defeated his opponent, so she asked. Chen Changsheng gave a simple recount of what had happened earlier, without explaining too much. Xian Yuan placed the two top-quality crystals in front of Chen Changsheng. Chen Changsheng shook his head, indicating that he didn't need it. He hadn't used any true essence in the previous match. He didn't need to replenish it. The examinees' gazes remained on Chen Changsheng. Not long ago, Chen Changsheng had been a beginner at cultivation who couldn't even complete his purification. Yet today, he had easily defeated the personal disciple of Heavenly Academy's principal. Logically, they should have been more surprised, but from the Ivy League gathering to the update of the proclamation of Azure Clouds, to the Archbishop's announcement on Chen Changsheng's behalf, Chen Changsheng had already been pushed to a very high position. Though they didn't have any evidence, they felt that he definitely had some sort of hidden strength. They had some sort of mental preparation or anticipation. Therefore, they were indeed very surprised, but not to the extent of losing themselves. What they were more concerned about was his true level of strength, as well as what method he had used to defeat that Heavenly Academy student in such a short period of time. It should be known that a young cultivator with keen eyes like Gohan Shi had already seen that the umbrella was a very powerful magic tool. At this point, Chen Changsheng was very thankful that the first round of the dueling today was a closed-door examination. The loser would be directly sent out of the education palace, unable to report the details of the match to their fellow students. The methods used by the victor would remain unknown. This was extremely beneficial for him in keeping his secrets and methods. The grand examination continued. Examinee number 62 had no choice but to choose Su Mou. The next examinee chose Tang 36. These two matches proceeded without any surprises. Nothing unexpected occurred. Su Mou and Tang 36 were the final victors. The examinees outside the building could only faintly hear the second defeated examinee angrily shouting that it was unfair. They had clearly performed well in the martial trial, placing in the first half, but they had encountered young geniuses like Su Mou and Tang 36. It was indeed hard to say that it was fair. It could only be said that these two examinees had bad luck to a certain extent. The first round of the dueling had finally reached its final moment. The last examinee looked at the Li Palace clergyman in charge of the examination and said, "Your Highness's ranking will not be included in the final score. How will this be counted?" This examinee had a dejected expression, causing others to feel pity for him. The clergyman said expressionlessly, "That is not something you need to consider." The examinee had no choice. He turned towards Luo, bowed, and said, "Please enlighten me, Your Highness." Applause erupted from the crowd at this moment. Facing an opponent like Luo, this examinee didn't immediately give up, didn't admit defeat. This was indeed worthy of applause. Regrettably, whether it was worthy of sympathy or applause, it had no way of influencing the outcome. A loud explosion resounded within the tower, as if a mountain had collapsed. In the next moment, Luo walked out from the tower. She walked in front of Chen Changsheng. Her small face was filled with happiness, saying, "Sir, I also only used one punch." She wasn't feeling proud. Second on the proclamation of Azure Clouds, amongst the younger generation of cultivators, she was already at the peak. Defeating a normal examinee wasn't something to be proud of. She was happy because she had used the same method as Chen Changsheng to end this match. Xian Yuan, Chen Changsheng, and Luo had each only used one punch, ending their respective duels. The examinees outside the tower heard three sounds: thunder, a dragon's roar, and a falling mountain. Tang 36 didn't use his fist. He had directly used the most powerful form of the three forms of Wen Shui. At that time, the examinees outside the tower had heard the sound of swords coming from within. They had thought that the river had overflowed its banks. Is there a need for this? Guan Fei looked at the three youths and the young girl by the woodlands, raising his eyebrows and saying, if he and the other three fellow disciples from Lishan Sword Sect had needed to enter the arena to compete, they would have naturally been able to end their duels as quickly as the group from Orthodox Academy, or even faster, creating a bigger commotion. But it was as he had said, Was there a need to create such a commotion for a normal duel? Regardless of how one felt about it, or what one's thoughts were, the 4 from Orthodox Academy had all passed the first round of the dueling phase. Now, the 64 examinees that had entered the second round had all been selected. Some examinees were very confident in their results in the academic phase. After considering it all, they should be able to enter the top 43. Their goal of entering the 3 grades of the grand examination had been accomplished. They naturally relaxed, a happy smile appearing on their faces. Some examinees thought that their results in the academic phase were average. They became even more silent and nervous, even a little anxious. If they wanted to enter the 3 grades of the grand examination, they needed to obtain a better result in the dueling phase. They needed to at least win one more round before they had any hope. Yet, dueling was similar to cultivation. The further one progressed, the stronger the opponent, the harder it would be to advance. After the first round of dueling ended, there was a short rest period. The examinees sat on the ground outside of the tower, eating the rations they had brought with them. Some of the examinees seized the time to meditate and recover their true essence. Officially brought a number of servant girls to the front of the tower, laid out a tablecloth, and laid out a variety of delicacies. They had originally been living with Luo in the education palace. Perhaps it was because of this that no clergyman stopped them. Was this the grand examination or a picnic? Looking at the scene by the woodlands, the examinees felt the taste of the rations in their mouths becoming more and more bland, giving rise to a lot of envy, especially when they saw Her Highness, Luo, half kneeling by Chun Chong Shung's side, using ebony chopsticks to feed him roasted meat. This envy naturally rose to jealousy. Guan Fei Bai looked towards that direction, feeling deeply moved, and said, "That fellow Qin Chong Shung must have saved the entire human world in his past life." Gohan sure smiled and said, "Then he must have saved White Emperor City first. What did everyone do in their past lives?" I originally wanted to say that I don't know what evil things I did in my past life. I turned to look at the leader, spread out my hands, and took back those words. Today is just a chapter. Chapter 147. Qin Chong Shung didn't notice the gazes that fell upon him. Since Luo's arrival at Li Palace, he hadn't enjoyed this sort of treatment for a long time. But once he returned to those days, he quickly adapted and became very used to it. Furthermore, he was currently thinking about something and was slightly distracted. He was confident that his results in the academic examination would at least place within the top 3. The problem was that Gohan should also be able to place within the top 3. Even Tian Haixing Shue's results in the academic examination wouldn't be too bad. Based on this, in order for him to place first upon the first banner, he would need to at least enter the final round of the dueling phase, which would require him to consecutively win 5 rounds. Of course, if Gohan Tian Haixing Shue, and the 4 scholars from Scholarly Manor who handed in their papers at the end of the academic examination were quickly eliminated, then the pressure on him would be greatly reduced. The problem was, no matter how you looked at it, this wasn't possible. Zhuang Fei Bai, Liang Banhu, and Qi Jian were all potential strong opponents. There was also Zhuang Huanyu, who was especially quiet today. What caused Qin Chong Shung to feel the most uneasy, or perhaps more accurately, cautious, was the lone clothed youth that stood out from the crowd. This Wolf Tribe youth didn't have any results in the academic examination. Therefore, regardless of his results in the dueling phase, he wouldn't be able to place first upon the first banner. Thus, he wouldn't be a direct competitor for him. However, what if he were to encounter this youth in the first few rounds? No one wanted to encounter this youth before the dueling phase. Gohan and Tian Haixing Shue were probably thinking the same. The short break quickly ended. Officially led the maids to pack up the food containers and left the area. The second round of the dueling phase was about to begin. The area outside of the tower gradually quietened down. Compared to the atmosphere prior to the first round, it was even more tense and oppressive. This was because the top 15 examinees were about to enter the ranks of the dueling phase. The first 15 examinees to pass through the River Chu were all very strong. There were 4 from Lishan Sword Sect, 2 from Star Caesar Academy. A senior from Holy Maiden Peak, Tian Haixing Shue, coldly stood at the forefront. Zhuang Huanyu calmly stood with a fellow student, The wolf tribe youth named as Xiao still stood alone in the outer perimeter, only he didn't recognize anyone. Compared to the first round, the second round of the dueling phase of the grand examination had the same basic rules, with only two major differences. Firstly, the opponents were no longer determined by the order of the first, and it had nothing to do with the examiners, but rather by drawing lots. Furthermore, for the subsequent rounds, lots would be drawn once more, and what opponents the examinees would face would be completely left up to fate. Secondly, from the second round onwards, the loser of a duel would no longer be directly sent out of the education palace, but would instead remain in the arena. Because the top 64 had already been decided, in order to determine the final rankings for the grand examination and the 3 grades, the examiners would not be able to guarantee absolute fairness in their grading, and the loser would most likely have to undergo a rematch. Before the duels began, lots had to be drawn. In a sense, the drawing of lots was even more important than the match itself. If he could draw a relatively weak opponent, it would be equivalent to passing a round in advance. But if he was unlucky and drew an opponent like Gohan Shi, what should he do? Dozens of pairs of eyes followed the hand of the Li Palace clergyman as it left the box and landed on the slip of paper with the examinee's name written on it. Tradition Academy, Xianyuan Pa. The Li Palace clergyman then pulled out a second slip of paper, glanced at it, and said, "Against the Shan Sword Sect, Gohan Shi." The area before the Tower of Purging Dust was silent, or perhaps deathly silent. It took a long time for the examinees to react, letting out countless cries of surprise. From everyone's point of view, since Xiao Shanjun had unexpectedly not participated in the grand examination, then the strongest in this year's grand examination would undoubtedly be Gohan Shi. They naturally assumed that his name would only appear much later. Who could have guessed that in the first round, the examiners would pull out a slip of paper with Gohan Shi's name written on it? The emotions within those cries of surprise were very complex. Apart from shock, there was also a lot of joy, and within a few cries of surprise, one could hear the emotions of schadenfreude. Just like how no one wanted to go up against that wolf tribe youth, and even more so, no one wanted to go up against Gohan Shi. Now, they didn't need to worry because the one going up against Gohan Shi was Xianyuan Pa, Orthodox Academy's Xianyuan Pa. The woodlands were very quiet. Chun Chong Sheng and Tang 36 looked at Xianyuan Pa. Their gazes didn't contain any sympathy, only questioning. At this moment, sympathy had no meaning. Xianyuan Pa had a blank expression on his face and asked, "What do we do?" Tang 36 said, "Can't you see that we're all waiting for you to make a decision?" Xianyuan Pa looked towards Luo and said, "Teacher, I'll listen to you." Luo looked towards Chun Chong Sheng and said, "Teacher, what do you think?" Chun Chong Sheng looked towards Tang 36 and said, "Why don't you make a decision?" Tang 36 didn't even think about it. He immediately raised his hand and shouted towards the Li Palace clergyman in charge of drawing the lots, "We forfeit." The crowd was in an uproar. No one could have imagined that Orthodox Academy would directly choose to forfeit the moment the lot was drawn. Wasn't this a bit too direct and efficient, or perhaps a bit too shameless? Sounds of ridicule could be heard from the crowd. Xianyuan Pa lowered his head, looking a little dejected. Chun Chong Sheng comforted him. "Preserve some of your strength. That way, you'll be able to gain some advantage in the next round." Tang 36 was in charge of external affairs. He looked at the examinees who were incessantly jeering and said, "Forfeiting means surrendering? If you're really that good, we'll give this lot to you and you could go fight against Gohan Shi." It was naturally impossible for the examinees to be allowed to sign, but his words reminded many of the examinees present that if their goal was to enter the 3 grades of the grand examination, then when encountering an undefeatable expert like Gohan Shi in the second round, forfeiting was perhaps the best choice. Thinking that they might also forfeit later on, the examinees naturally quietened down. The drawing of lots continued. The peaceful scene was once again broken after the clergyman drew out the names of Tang 36 and Liang Banhu. The examinees looked towards the woodlands. No one laughed at Orthodox Academy. Instead, they began to sympathize with them. Tang 36's expression was calm as usual, but his mood was extremely bad. He said in a voice that only the people next to him could hear, "What kind of fucking luck is this?" Xin Yuanpo's encounter with Gohan Shi was extremely bad luck. He was matched against Liang Ban, who, his luck wasn't any better. Not long after the drawing of lots started, two people from Orthodox Academy were matched against two people from the Divine State's 7 laws, publicly recognized as the strongest. No matter how you looked at it, Orthodox Academy was obviously unlucky today. Orthodox Academy's bad luck didn't end here. The piece of paper with Chun Chongsheng's name was drawn by the Li Palace clergyman. Following that, the clergyman drew his opponent, Scholarly Manor's Huaguang. The crowd was in an uproar at this moment. Even the examinees who had the worst impression of Orthodox Academy weren't in the mood to gloat. The most shocking thing happened at the end. Luo's opponent was Tianhai Xingxue. The area before the Tower of Purging Dust was silent. The sound of the clergyman drawing the lot was extremely clear. The crowd looked towards the group from Orthodox Academy by the woodlands, shocked and speechless. The group from Orthodox Academy were also shocked and speechless. At this moment, the crowd could be sure that the result of this drawing had nothing to do with luck, but was instead a deliberate attempt to suppress Orthodox Academy, because the probability of this happening was too small. Xin Yuanpo's encounter with Gohan Shi, he could only forfeit and admit defeat. Tang 36 had a great reputation and was known as a young genius, but his strength was still quite far from Liang Ban, whose there shouldn't be any chance of victory. As for the third match, that scholar from Scholarly Manor named Huaguang, although he didn't enter the proclamation of Azure Clouds, according to his performance in the martial trial, he should be the second strongest amongst the 4 students of Scholarly Manor, stronger than the other 2 students who had already entered the proclamation of Azure Clouds, only below Zhong Hui, who was ranked 9th. Even if Chun Chongsheng had a fortuitous encounter, he still wouldn't be able to defeat his opponent. The most obvious evidence was Luo's drawing of lots. She who was ranked 2nd on the proclamation of Azure Clouds in this year's grand examination. Her only fear were Gohan Shi and Tianhai Xingxue, who had already completed their ethereal opening, yet she had drawn Tianhai Xingxue. More importantly, amongst all the examinees present, only Tianhai Xingxue's family background was similar to hers. At least he could freely display his strength in battle. Similar to the Tower of Purging Dust, the Hall of Zhao, one was also completely silent. His Eminence, the Archbishop, finally slowly opened his eyes. His somewhat murky gaze fell upon the list of lots that appeared on the mirror, gradually turning cold. Mou's eyelids were slightly drooping, her thoughts unknown. Prince Chun Lu slightly raised his eyebrows. Anger was evident on his face. Shuexing Chuan was a little surprised. He turned around and glanced at Su Shiji. Su Shiji's face was expressionless. He maintained his silence. The other important figures in the hall also maintained their silence. None of the important figures in the Hall of Zhao were stupid. How could they not see that this drawing of lots was a result of someone else's actions? It was very obvious. The Board of Ecclesiastic Education's favoritism towards Orthodox Academy, in the end, caused the dissatisfaction of the Orthodoxy's new faction. After enduring silently for a long time, they had finally begun their counterattack in the final round of the grand examination, but it was unknown if this matter had been personally approved by the Divine Empress or His Holiness. Using Southerners to fight against Orthodox Academy, this really isn't a pretty sight. Heavenly Academy's principal Mao Qiuyu sighed. He stood up and walked towards the exit of the Hall of Zhaowen. Hearing these words, some of the people in the hall, such as the principal of Li Palace College and the 2 bishops of Orthodoxy, had awkward expressions. Mao Qiuyu's status was high. He could say whatever he wanted, he could leave whenever he wanted, but he couldn't change the result of the drawing of lots. The grand examination had to continue. The drawing of lots also continued. The ones that received the most attention were naturally the 4 matches that had to do with Orthodox Academy. Guan Fei Bai, Zhuang Huanyu, and the other renowned young experts had drawn relatively weak opponents. Only Su Mou's luck seemed to be even worse than Chun Chongsheng's group, because his opponent was that youth named Xiao. Hearing the Li Palace clergyman announce his name, The examinees present finally knew the full name of that wolf tribe youth for the first time. That youth was called Wofu Zhixiao. The surname Wofu was extremely rare. It was obvious that he wasn't someone from the Central Plains. He was probably from a small tribe beyond the Great Wall. Tang 36 patted Su Mou's shoulder and said, "Admit defeat. Who told you to stand with us earlier? Bad luck is contagious." Was it really luck? Of course not. Everyone in front of the Tower of Purging Dust knew this. But, just like in the first round, if there was no evidence of manipulation, then there was no way to object. You could only admit defeat, or attempt to obtain an inconceivable victory. Tang 36 advised Su Mou to choose the former, but he himself was prepared to choose the latter. Luo and Chun Changsheng also had the same thoughts. Today's chapter, due to personal reasons, there have been fewer updates these few days. Apologies. Chapter 148. Regardless of what Tang 36 said, Su Mou naturally had his own judgment and choice. As the representative of the Palace College, he couldn't just directly admit defeat. Furthermore, his stubborn and dull nature had determined that even if his opponent was that mysterious and strong wolf tribe youth, he wouldn't lose confidence. He saluted the examiner in charge of the duel, then walked onto the stone steps outside the tower. The crowd gradually parted. Zhixiao walked over. His footsteps didn't stop, directly entering the tower. The examinees looked at the youth's slightly thin back. They all had different expressions on their faces. From early morning till now, aside from saying a single sentence to the examiner, no one else had heard his voice. They were all very curious as to how strong this wolf tribe youth, widely known for being mysterious and cold-blooded, was and what kind of person he was. As for the result of this duel, not many people care because in many people's eyes, the result of this duel had already been decided. Su Mou, who was ranked 33rd upon the proclamation of Azure Clouds, obviously wasn't weak, but his opponent was just too strong. Qin Changsheng turned around to look at Luo, who had a pensive look on her face. Thinking back to the moment when the wolf tribe youth had turned his head and given him a mental blow, he thought to himself that Luo's defeat to Tian Hai Sheng Shui might be a good thing. At least she wouldn't have to face this youth and wouldn't be in any danger. The wooden door to the tower slowly closed. Not long after, it opened once again. The examinees were a little stunned. Although they knew that this duel wouldn't have any surprises, the fact that it had ended so quickly was still shocking. The first to walk out of the tower should be the victor, the wolf tribe youth, Zhixiao. He stood on the stone steps, looking towards the woodlands, towards the direction of Orthodox Academy. Throughout the course of the grand examination, this youth had always stood outside of the crowd, or at the very front, leaving everyone with only his back. At this moment, this was the first time many people had seen his face. He wore a thin cotton robe with a cloth belt around his waist. His feet were bare. His trousers were 3 inches above his ankles, simple to the extreme. He didn't have any weapons on him, but the feeling he gave off was extremely dangerous, akin to a sharpened blade. No, he was the blade's edge. That's right, his danger didn't lie in his physical form, but in that feeling, as if looking at him for too long would cause one's eyes to feel a stabbing pain. Many examinees subconsciously retracted their gazes or looked elsewhere. After a while, the tower's wooden door slowly closed. Su Mou did not come out. The examinees were a little surprised. Someone couldn't help but ask, didn't they say that the loser can stay behind? The Li Palace clergyman glanced at Zhixiao and slightly frowned, then said to the examinees, Su Mou's injuries are too severe. He has been sent out of the education palace for treatment. Hearing these words, the area outside the Tower of Purging Dust fell into a deathly silence. The examinees found it hard to suppress their complex emotions. They once again turned their gazes towards the wolf tribe youth. There was shock in the eyes of the examinees, but more of it was fear. Su Mou was the most outstanding student of Li Palace College, a young genius ranked 33rd on the proclamation of Azure Clouds. Even if he wasn't a match for this person, the previous duel had only lasted for a short period of time, and there were presumably many examiners watching from the sidelines. In the end, this person still managed to injure Su Mou so severely. Just how strong was this person? Within the hall of Zhao 1, the principal of Li Palace College stared at the image on the mirror, his face extremely gloomy. At this time, the duel in the Tower of Purging Dust had already ended. There was only a patch of yellow sand on the mirror. That was the ground. At the bottom, there were a few patterns of green leaves and a few bloodstains. Sumo Yu had suffered extremely severe injuries. His life should not be in danger in Li Palace, but it was unknown whether it would affect his future cultivation. He was the principal of Li Palace College. He had more than enough reasons to be angry, but he didn't know how to vent his anger. Zhixio and Sumo Yu's duel had started too quickly and ended even faster. Not to mention the Li Palace clergymen who were controlling the situation on the second floor. Even if he was personally present, he still wouldn't have been able to prevent that tragic scene from happening, unless he had been present beforehand. The 4 examinees of Orthodox Academy had all met the strongest opponents in the drawing of lots. That was the result of someone else's actions. He was very clear on the reason behind it. As for Sumo Yu, the student that Li Palace College had placed their hopes on, for him to meet a monster like Zhixio in the second round, it could only be said that his luck in the drawing of lots was too bad. Sumo Yu was forced to withdraw from the competition due to his heavy injuries. No matter how outstanding his results in the academic examination were, the most he could do was enter the 3rd grade. Advancing further was impossible. At this point in the grand examination, all of Li Palace College's students had been eliminated, not to mention Li Shan Sword Sect and Scholatry Manor. Star Caesar Academy still had 4 people left. How could he endure this? The principal of Li Palace College stood up, his face ashen, flicked his sleeves, and left the hall of Zhao 1, no longer interested in the subsequent events of the grand examination. Heavenly Academy's principal, Mao Yu, had already left due to his dissatisfaction with the fact that some important figures had secretly influenced the drawing of lots, forcing Orthodox Academy into a desperate situation. At this moment, within the hall of Zhao 1, only the principals of 3 of the 6 Ivies remained. The second round of the dueling phase of the grand examination continued. The wind of fists and rain of swords never ceased. True Essence was restlessly agitated, but these were all events that occurred within the Tower of Purging Dust. Very few of these events were transmitted outside. In the following matches, Zhuang Huanyu easily defeated his opponents. Qi Jian and Guan Fei Bai from Li Shan Sword Sect also didn't take long to enter the 3rd round. The next to be sent out was the young scholar from Scholatry Manor. Amongst the 4 from Scholatry Manor that were participating in this year's grand examination, he was the youngest and also the strongest, Zhonghui. Standing upon the stone steps in front of the Tower of Purging Dust, looking at the scene before him, his expression was a little ugly. In the past, he had naturally been the focus of attention within Scholatry Manor. Even if the grand examination was a gathering of experts, logically speaking, when it was his turn to fight, he should have attracted the attention of many examinees. Yet, no one was looking at him. This made him feel very uncomfortable. It wasn't that the examinees didn't value him. A young expert that ranked 9th upon the proclamation of Azure Clouds had the qualifications to be valued. It was just that Zhong Hui's opponent didn't have much of a reputation. Coincidentally, the next match was the focal point of everyone's attention. Therefore, at this moment, the gazes of the crowd didn't fall upon him, but upon 2 other places. The woodlands where the group from Orthodox Academy were, and the riverside where the 4 disciples of Li Shan were. The next match will be Tang 36's turn. Chun Chong Sheng was currently crouched on the ground, incessantly talking to him, his hand holding onto a branch, writing and drawing on the ground. Luo was crouched to the side, using her hand to support her chin. Earnestly listening, Xin Yuanpa stood above, using his tall and sturdy body to block the gazes of the crowd. Chun Chong Sheng was currently explaining some of the essentials of Li Shan sword arts. This had nothing to do with last-minute practice. Rather, it was extremely focused guidance. This was because he was using the essentials of Li Shan sword arts as a comparison to Liang Ban, whose few famous battle examples. The lines that the branch had drawn on the ground were all sword forms. Liang Ban, who was the opponent that Tang 36 was about to face. The amount and purity of her true essence is definitely inferior to your opponent's. Chun Chong Sheng put down the branch. Looking at Tang 36's unconcerned expression, he said seriously, "Even after coming to the capital, you aren't as lazy as you were in Shui, but you know how hard it is for Li Shan disciples to train in the sword. Therefore, there's no need to argue. You are inferior to your opponent." Tang 36 spread out his hands, indicating that he didn't mean anything else. Chun Chong Sheng glanced at the riverside and continued, "You and him are at the same level. As long as you don't pass that threshold, the difference between the upper stage of meditation won't have too much of an effect on a battle. Therefore, if you want to defeat him, you have to work on your moves and make a fuss." Tang 36's expression became serious. He asked, "How do I start?" Chun Chong Sheng said, "Attack first." Tang 36 slightly raised his eyebrows. "Isn't that the same as what you and Xin Yuanpa did in the first round?" Chun Chong Sheng said, "It's not the same because all the attacks are feints. You have to prepare at least 20 moves as a continuous attack, not giving Liang Ban Hu any chance to think. You have to try to make him make a mistake. Then when the sword form is about to be completed, he will definitely think that you're going to use the 3 forms of Shui. That will be our chance." Speaking to this point, he picked up the branch again and wrote a few words on the ground. "Tang Tang, and you are at the same level of cultivation. After studying with Chun Chong Sheng for such a long time at the Tradition Academy, he must have improved his mastery of sword arts. He won't be weaker than you or me, but the amount and purity of his true essence is definitely not as good as yours. His willpower is also not as good as yours." Gohan Sure reached out his hand and scooped some water from the riverside, washed his face, glanced at the direction of the Tradition Academy people, then continued. "Tang Tang's most outstanding trait is his personality. He likes to take the unusual path, and when he's angry, it's quite interesting. If I were Chun Chong Sheng, I would definitely place my only chance of winning on my moves." Qi Jin listened on the side. He was a bit confused and asked, "Senior, since the sword arts are about the same, how can we use moves to win?" "The sequence of sword moves, the timing, the choice, as well as using the sword moves to create momentum," Gohan Sure patiently explained to him. Hearing this, Guan Fei remembered the time when he and Princess Luo fought at the Ivy League gathering. He silently nodded. Liang Ban, who looked at the riverside, his slightly immature face was full of confidence and calmness. He said, "Chun Chong Sheng must be giving him ideas right now." "Correct." Gohan Sure looked at him and said, "Chun Chong Sheng will definitely think of a way for Tang Tang to use his sword moves to condense momentum, and then use a surprising method to forcefully find a chance of victory. As I said before, Tang Tang's most outstanding trait is that crazy and fierce energy. So I think that the sword move he will use after condensing momentum will not be the 3 forms of Shui, because although those 3 moves are powerful, they're not fierce enough." Liang Ban, who was pensive, he began to recall those sword scrolls he had seen in Mount Li Sword Hall. Guan Fei thought it over and realized that if it really was as his senior guest, then there really wasn't any good way to deal with it. If he were to enter the field and fight Tang Tang, he could probably only rely on his true essence to fight. "Fight with force," Gohan Sure said to Liang Ban Hu. Liang Ban, who was somewhat confused, but Guan Fei was even more shocked, thinking, "Isn't this the stupidest method?" Chapter 149. Guan Fei could never have imagined that his senior would suggest a direct confrontation. What good was this strategy that he himself could come up with? Gohan Sure ignored him, looked at Liang Ban Hu and said, "Don't worry about whether he's using a real move or a feint for the sake of us. There's no need to counter every move, just exchange moves with him." Guan Fei was proficient in the way of the sword. He was clear that the so-called exchange move for move, in the end, would be an exchange of injury for injury. He thought to himself, "Junior brother Liang is clearly stronger than Tang 36. Why is there need to use this method of mutual destruction?" Gohan Sure looked at Liang Ban, who with his head lowered in silence. He knew that his junior brothers were somewhat confused. He calmly explained, "Tang Tang is inferior to you, so Chun Chong Sheng has to help him win by surprise. But you're stronger than Tang Tang, so you can't walk the path of surprise. You should use the simplest, or even stupidest, method to obtain a normal victory." He stood up, accepted the handkerchief that Qi Jian handed over, and wiped his face clean. He looked towards the woodlands, where Tang 36's eyebrows were about to fly off, and said, "Why do we have to fight head-on? Because when this guy gets angry, he's really going overboard. Exchanging moves for moves will definitely result in injury, but this should be the method with the least cost to defeat him." Liang Banhu thought for a moment, then said, "Senior, understand." The door to the tower slowly opened. The young scholar from Scholarly Manor, Zhong Hui, had easily defeated his opponent and walked out. What made him a little unhappy was that the gazes of the examinees outside the tower still didn't turn towards him. They were still looking at those two places, perhaps even more fervent than before. This was because Liang Banhu and Tang 36 had already stood up. Without much ceremony, Liang Banhu and Tang 36 paid their respects to the Li Palace clergymen. Then, one after the other, entered the tower. Looking at the tightly shut wooden door, the examinees' expressions were extremely focused. The entire area was silent. Over 10 matches had been held in the second round of the grand examination. Aside from the match between the Wolf Tribe youth, Zhixiu, and Su Mou, this was the match between the strongest two. This match was even more closely watched than the one between Zhixiu and Su Mou, because everyone understood that aside from Liang Banhu and Tang 36, there were two other participants. The two of them wouldn't appear on the stage, but their effects wouldn't be any weaker than if they were to appear on the stage themselves, just like on the last night of the Ivy Festival. There were some people in the world who could directly change the outcome of a battle through their knowledge and ability to think. These people were the strategists on the front lines against the demon race. In the vast majority of schools and sects, they were the highly respected professors or elders. Only in the Li Mountain Sword Sect and the Tradition Academy, the people who played this role were two students. For today's grand examination, the teachers of the various sects were unable to participate in the examination grounds. Many people were extremely envious of the examinees from Li Shan Sword Sect and Orthodox Academy. It was precisely because they had Gohan Shi and Chun Changsheng to guide them on the spot. These two had the ability to solve many problems on the spot and change many things. Time slowly passed. The Tower of Purging Dust remained quiet. Chen Changsheng's expression didn't change, but his hands clenched tighter and tighter. He felt worse and worse because it was too quiet. Suddenly, a fiery red color appeared in the dark blue sky. This color came from the reflection of the swords within the Tower of Purging Dust. It looked extremely warm, but behind the warmth was hidden a blazing danger. Red clouds filled the sky. It was too beautiful to behold. 3 forms of Wenshui, gathering evening clouds. Outside of the tower, cries of surprise resounded. Tang 36's sword momentum had actually broken through the Education Palace's restriction, appearing in the air above the tower, entering everyone's eyes. Gohan Shi raised his head to look at the sunset, remaining silent. He discovered that Tang 36's improvement in the past few days at Orthodox Academy was actually greater than what everyone had imagined. Chen Changsheng's expression became grave, because according to the plan, today shouldn't have a sky of red clouds. Or perhaps Tang 36 had gone all out, but what did this mean? Liang Banhu, who was currently still silent, had actually forced him to go all out ahead of time. This meant that Liang Banhu still had strength to spare, and for some unknown reason, he had actually prevented Tang 36 from linking the previous 10 or so sword stances into sword momentum. Outside of the tower, cries of surprise and praise once again resounded. The sky of red clouds suddenly became incomparably bright. The small stream was illuminated. It seemed as if countless red maples had sprouted from the banks of the stream. Hanging sunset. Immediately after, a stream of maple, Tang 36's sword manifestation had actually spread to such a far distance, being able to affect the environment outside of the tower. As a youth that had yet to achieve ethereal opening, this was already enough for him to be proud of. Yet, Chen Changsheng's expression became increasingly grave, because up until this point, he still hadn't seen Liang Banhu's sword. No one present had seen it. Suddenly, the sunset faded, the red maples faded, an extremely faint, extremely gentle, extremely peaceful sword manifestation swept across the sky above the tower. The sword manifestation was like water, like clear water, countless expanses of clear lake water, washing the sky. Whether it was the sunset, the setting sun, or the red maples, they were all washed clean, reminding everyone that those colors previously weren't real. They had been painted by someone using a sword as a brush. Since they were painted, they used paint. As long as it was paint, it could be washed away by water, as long as there was enough water and it was clear enough. Half a lake of clear water. It could wash one's feet. It could even wash one's hair. It could even wash the sky clean, revealing its original azure color. Outside of the tower, countless examinees raised their heads to look at the sky. They didn't cry out, they remained silent. Whether it was the sunset or the sky washing lake water, they were all reflections of the sword manifestations of the two youths within the tower, within the miniature world. They really were strong. Chun Sheng remained silent for a while, then regained his composure. He looked towards Gohan Shi, who was far away by the stream, and nodded his head in greeting. Gohan Shi nodded his head in return. The great doors of the tower opened. Liang Ban, who walked out, one step behind him, Tang 36 also walked out. This was probably the difference of one step. Both of them had injuries on their bodies. Sword marks were clearly visible on their clothes. The examiner gave the two a praising glance and said, Li Shan Sword Sect, Liang Ban who wins. Liang Ban who and Tang 36 bowed to each other, then walked down the stone steps towards the woodlands and the stream, respectively. Tang 36 was very tired. Perhaps due to this reason, he didn't want to speak. He walked back to the woodlands, sat on the ground, leaned against a poplar tree, and closed his eyes. When Chun Sheng was feeding him medicine, he only opened his mouth, still refusing to open his eyes. Xian Yuanpo walked to his side, crouched down, and looked at him. His face that was covered with light green stubble and was very young was filled with worry. He said, Say something. Tang 36 closed his eyes, refusing to pay attention to him. Xian Yuanpo was a little anxious. He looked towards Chun Sheng and asked, Is he all right? Chun Sheng said, It's possible that Liang Ban, whose injuries are a little heavy. He needs to rest. Let's not disturb him. Many things in this world are like this, especially for males in their youth stage. When many people want to show concern for you, you will resist this concern and ignore them. But when those who care for you are about to leave, you will begin to feel lonely and uneasy. Tang 36 opened his eyes, looked at Chun Sheng, and said angrily, What do you mean by my injuries are a little heavy? How did I injure myself? Luo pointed at the cuts on his uniform that were caused by the sword, then pointed at the shallow line of blood on his face. This is called heavy? Didn't you see that guy Liang Ban, who his leg was almost cut off by me? Tang 36 said angrily, I'm just a little tired. I just want to lean against a tree and lie down for a while. Can you guys stop bothering me? After saying that, he once again closed his eyes. Chun Sheng knew that this guy had always been proud and arrogant. Losing in the second round of the grand examination, he must be feeling terrible. But he couldn't see this guy immersed in this kind of emotion. He always thought that this was a waste of life. There was no meaning in it. All negative emotions should be instantly defeated or abandoned. Do you lack money? He looked at Tang 36 and asked. Tang 36 closed his eyes and sneered. Have you ever seen someone richer than me? Chun Sheng asked again. Your academic exam results should be okay, right? Combined, can you enter the top 3? Tang 36 opened his eyes, looked at him, and asked, Entering the top 3 shouldn't be a problem, but why are you asking this? Chun Sheng looked at him and said seriously, If you can enter the top 3, you can read the heavenly book, and you don't lack money, the 13 divisions of Radiant Green and the Sisters of the Holy Maiden all like you. What else do you want? Tang 36 felt that this question seemed to have a hidden meaning. He thought about it for a long time, then asked with uncertainty. First upon the first banner? Chun Sheng said impatiently. That's mine. Tang 36 laughed and scolded. You're really shameless. At this moment, he was sure that Chun Sheng wasn't preparing to give him a lesson on life, but was only trying to comfort him, and it was indeed effective. At least he didn't want to close his eyes and pretend to be asleep. Tell me, Luo said from the side. Tang 36 was silent for a long time, then said, I never would have thought that Liang Ban who would fight so stupidly. Luo and Xian Yuanpa didn't understand, but Chen Changsheng did. Liang Ban, whose ability was originally above Tang 36. Tang 36 and Chen Changsheng could only try to win by surprise, using a method that the opponent would never have thought of to give the grand examination a surprise. But they didn't think that Liang Ban, who would use the simplest method to deal with it. Didn't think of it? No, he didn't think of anything. I've never seen such an ugly and stupid way of fighting. Tang 36 was silent for a while, then continued. He didn't even think of breaking through the sword moves that you thought of for me. He just kept on attacking, stupid, without any beauty, but I have to admit, it was very useful. The first 10 moves were used, but they couldn't be connected. They were intermittent, making me very uncomfortable. In the end, I didn't even have the chance to use the 3 weird moves you thought of. I could only use the 3 forms of Wenshui to try my luck. He held on, so I lost. If Chen Changsheng could think of it, then everyone participating in the grand examination could think of it. Liang Ban, whose battle strategy must have contained a lot of Gohan Shi's wisdom. If at the Ivy League gathering, Chen Changsheng and Gohan Shi could be said to be equal, then today, in the battle between Tang 36 and Liang Ban, Chen Changsheng lost completely. He said to Tang 36, I'm sorry. Tang 36 was silent for a while, then said, This has nothing to do with you. You don't need to apologize. If I was stronger than Liang Ban, then Gohan should have been the one to worry about. You could have easily broken through him, but in the end, it was because of my lack of ability. Speaking of which, I'm the one who should be apologizing. I'm the one who should be apologizing. Xin Yuanpa honestly said from the side. I don't understand what you're saying. Then say something you can understand. Tang 36 smiled, then looked at Chen Changsheng and calmly said, I've lost 2 matches. I can't lose again. While they were conversing, the duels were still ongoing. Another 2 matches had ended. Soon, it would be Chen Changsheng's turn to compete. Chen Changsheng thought for a while, then said, I can win this match. After saying that, he stood up and walked towards the tower. Chapter 150. The second round of the grand examination had already entered the latter half. In the 2 most eye-catching matches between Lishan Sword Sect and Orthodox Academy, Orthodox Academy forfeited 1 match and lost the other. Lishan Sword Sect could be said to have regained all the face they lost at the Ivy League gathering, while Orthodox Academy was forced to the edge of a cliff. Even though the PvP battles weren't group battles, and the grand examination only ranked candidates based on their individual results, the young examinees weren't born from the cracks of a rock. Whether it was in the eyes of the world or in their own minds, their results represented the glory of their academy or sect. Orthodox Academy's 3rd contestant was Chen Changsheng. This was because Orthodox Academy's publicly acknowledged strongest princess, Luo, had encountered Tian Haixing Shui, who had already completed his ethereal opening. Most people thought she had no chance of winning. Therefore, if Orthodox Academy didn't want to be completely annihilated in the second round, they would have to see if Chen Changsheng could pass this round. Although he had defeated the disciple from Huangshan Valley in the first round, no one thought highly of him. Everyone knew that he was the weakest of the 4 students from Orthodox Academy. Now that even Tang 36 had lost, how could he avoid defeat? Miracle? If it happened often, then it wouldn't be a miracle anymore, but a problem. The second reason why no one thought highly of Chen Changsheng was that there was a problem with the drawing of lots for the second round. Everyone knew that someone must have tampered with the drawing of lots. Chen Changsheng's opponent for this round was the scholar from Scholatry Manor, Guang. No matter how one looked at it, this was the best choice. Not Chen Changsheng's best choice, but the best choice for those who wanted Chen Changsheng to fail. From the Divine Queen to the peddlers, from the faraway White Emperor couple to the capital storytellers, everyone in the Central Continent was paying attention to the grand examination that was being held in the capital. Following the announcement of his engagement with Su Yu Rong at the Ivy League gathering and the announcement of the Archbishop's intention to place first upon the first banner, countless pairs of eyes were focused on Chen Changsheng. Under these circumstances, those who wanted to suppress Orthodox Academy and Chun Changsheng had to be even more careful. At least they couldn't let others see through the problem at first glance. If Chun Changsheng had to draw lots against Go Hanshi in the second round, everyone would know that something was amiss. Not only would the education board flip the tables, the castanets on the tables of the storytellers in the capital would also ring many times. The scholar of Scholatry Manor, Hua Guang, was the best choice. This young scholar had always been peacefully studying in Scholatry Manor and had never left the academy to gain experience, so he had never entered the proclamation of Azure Clouds. To those who did not know the inside story, he seemed to be very weak. In reality, Scholatry Manor didn't have any weaklings. Hua Guang was a target that Scholatry Manor had focused on nurturing, preparing to amaze the world with a single brilliant feat at the grand examination. How could Chun Changsheng be his match? The atmosphere in the forest was a little gloomy. Tang 36 leaned against the white poplar tree and looked at Chun Changsheng's back. He suddenly said, "If you can't win, then retreat. Don't let anything happen." Previously, when he said to Chun Changsheng that he couldn't lose again, it was because he knew that Chun Changsheng, for some reason, had to obtain first upon the first banner in the grand examination. Since that was the case, he obviously couldn't lose, yet, thinking that even if he were once again inexplicably defeat that scholar from Scholatry Manor, in the end he still wouldn't be a match for Tian Haixing Shui or Go Hanshi. He wanted to take back what he had just said. For his point of view, Chun Changsheng was still very young. He still had a lot of time. With his talent and knowledge, who knew how far he could progress in the future? If he couldn't even obtain first upon the first banner by risking his life, then why would he? Why didn't he set his sights on the future? Why did he have to be so cruel to himself? Chun Changsheng waved his hand. He didn't turn his head because he had no way of explaining. Although he was still young, he didn't have much time to waste. He bowed to the clergyman, then walked up the stone steps. In the first round, his right boot had shattered. This time he had changed into a new pair. This pair of boots was brought from her bedroom by official Li. It was new, but comfortable to wear. The size was just right. Luo must have secretly remembered his measurements. Wearing this pair of boots, he felt his feet were firmly planted on the ground. He was very confident. By the forest, Xian Yuanpai said to Tang 36, "Do you want to rest for a while?" Tang 36 looked at Chun Changsheng, who was far away on the stone steps. After a moment of silence, he said, "No need. Give me the crystal." Just as Elder Tianji had commented when the proclamation of Azure Clouds was updated, he had been greatly affected by Chun Changsheng. For example, at this very moment, looking at Chun Changsheng's figure, he quickly shook off his previous dejected mood and prepared to meditate to recover his true essence. Due to the possibility of an extra round, he had to at least enter the 3 grades. Otherwise, he would truly feel that he was inferior in front of Chun Changsheng. This had nothing to do with one's cultivation level or results. It had to do with one's willpower. The Tower of Purging Dust opened. Chun Changsheng and the scholar from Scholatry Manor, named Hua Guang, entered. The two of them were separated by a distance of over 10 meters, standing upon the sand-covered ground, quietly staring at each other. If one were to look closely, they would be able to see that beneath the sand beneath their feet, there were faint traces of blood, likely left behind by the examinees that had previously battled. "I've heard of you." Hua Guang broke the silence, looking at him, and said, "Before coming to the capital." This scholar from Scholatry Manor seemed to be around 18 or 19 years old. His expression was cold and detached, as if he had been cast from the same mold as his fellow students. In reality, their appearances were not similar at all. The reason why they gave off this feeling was because the young scholars from Scholatry Manor all had an indescribable air about them. Chun Changsheng didn't respond. He didn't think there was a need. "I knew I would meet you at the grand examination." Hua Guang looked at him and calmly said, "Before coming to the capital." Only now did Chun Changsheng know that the suppression of Orthodox Academy in today's grand examination wasn't only due to the Zhou dynasty or perhaps someone from within the Orthodoxy. It had even involved the faraway south. But he still didn't say anything, calmly adjusting his breathing and the circulation of true essence. To resist the invasion of the demon race, the human world needs to unite. The torrential momentum cannot be stopped by anyone. Anyone who tries in vain to stop it will only be washed into the stinking gutter of history. And you have already affected the confluence of the north and south, therefore, you cannot obtain first upon the first banner, nor can you marry Su Yurong. Hua Guang looked at him expressionlessly and said, Chun Chong Sheng finally understood what that indescribable feeling was. It was the same feeling as the words spoken by that scholar from the countryside on the last night of the Ivy League gathering. In this world, there have always been some people, some scholars, who believe in some very strange principles. To establish a heart for heaven and earth, to establish a life for life, to continue learning for the saints, to establish peace for all ages. Therefore, please die. To shoulder justice, after your death, I will take care of your family, and this world will also be taken care of by me. Chun Chong Sheng shook his head. If it was only the first half, then it was very respectable, but if the second half was added, then it wouldn't be good. He didn't like this smell. Compared to the smell of blood emitted from Su Shiji's body, he disliked it even more. Don't worry, I won't use words to humiliate you, because that's meaningless and very boring. Hua Guang looked at him indifferently and said, but the tip of his eyebrows slightly twitched for a moment. Perhaps at this moment, he remembered Tang 36 sharp and unkind words during the martial trial in the Boiling Time Forest. I will easily defeat you. He looked at Chun Chong Sheng and said condescendingly, draw your sword and accept your defeat. Chun Chong Sheng remained silent. He didn't reply, nor did he draw his own sword. Thus, Hua Guang's actions were very laughable, akin to drawing a sword against a wall or reading a long lyric poem to the starry sky. Yellow sand quietly covered the ground. Hua Guang's expression became slightly cold. He looked at him and said, if you don't draw your sword, then you won't have the chance to do so today. Following these words, a clear and strong aura emitted from his body. Chun Chong Sheng quietly looked at him. He slowly raised his right hand. It was very close to the hilt of the short sword at his waist. He could grasp it with his hand. In the end, he didn't grasp the hilt. He retracted his right hand, his 5 fingers clasped together, forming a fist. Very good. Hua Guang looked at his actions and felt greatly humiliated. His eyebrows slowly twitched, and he took a deep breath. An extremely pure, true essence seeped out, passing through the ochre-colored scholar's robes, bringing up a gust of wind within the tower. That gust of wind encircled Hua Guang's body, akin to a barrier. He carried a large sword on his back. He didn't draw it. Instead, like Chun Chong Sheng, he clenched his fist and punched out. An explosive hum resounded. A hole instantly appeared in the windscreen that encircled him. A fist suffused with a faint green luster, formed from true essence, violently shot out from that hole, instantly traversing a distance of over 10 meters, arriving before Chun Chong Sheng. What was even more shocking was, within that windscreen, fist manifestations condensed one after the other, attacking towards Chun Chong Sheng's body. Dozens of true essence fist manifestations, akin to real fists, came from all directions, like a storm. Within the hall of Zhao 1, that gigantic mirror of light, with a circumference of over 10 meters, clearly transmitted the scene of the battle within the tower to the eyes of the personages within the hall. From the moment Chun Chong Sheng and Hua Guang entered the tower, the hall became abnormally quiet. His Eminence didn't continue sleeping. He calmly looked at Chun Chong Sheng's reflection in the mirror. His expression didn't reveal whether or not he still had the same confidence as before. Within the mirror, dozens of green lights suddenly appeared. Although they weren't present, just by looking at the image, it was as if they could feel the power contained within. Shui Xingchuan's body slightly leaned forward, saying in surprise, "Regiment-shattering fist?" For the personages within the hall of Zhao 1, that scholar from Scholarly Manor, Hua Guang, was only at the meditation realm. The methods he displayed naturally wouldn't shock them. But thinking of Hua Guang's age, being able to cultivate the most difficult regiment-shattering fist to such a level, they were still rather surprised. The one who was about to receive these dozens of regiment-shattering fists was Chun Changsheng. Within the hall of Zhao Wan, a lot of people silently announced his elimination within their hearts. His Eminence's eyes slightly narrowed. His murky gaze once again became sharp. Mo Yu's expression was indifferent. The hand resting on the armrest of her chair, her knuckles were slightly white. Prince Chen Lu gave her a glance. A lot of doubts arose. Happy Mid-Autumn Festival. Chapter 151. The fist manifestation of the regiment-shattering fist traveled through the air, condensing and not dissipating. Only upon coming into contact with the opponent or some other obstacle would it release its power, allowing it to perfectly retain its initial power. Its defense-breaking ability was extremely terrifying. Even a cultivator that had completed a perfect purification couldn't use their body to take it head-on. They had to think of a way to avoid it, or use an even stronger true essence to forcefully suppress it. This fist technique also had another characteristic. The fist was like the wind condensing into a fist from start to finish. It was like a tempest enveloping all directions. A single fist could defeat tens of people, perhaps even more. It was most suitable for use on the battlefield. At its peak, there was a legend that a single fist could defeat an army of 1,000. Therefore, it was called the regiment-shattering fist. In the first match, Chun Changsheng displayed an unimaginable speed, but the regiment-shattering fist didn't give him any room to display his speed. Anyone could see that his true essence was very ordinary. Compared to the geniuses participating in the examination, it was even more pitiful. If he didn't have any other tricks up his sleeve, he would undoubtedly lose. The hall of Zhao Wan was very quiet. Everyone looked at the scene on the mirror, seeing those tens of fists glowing with a green light, hurtling towards Chun Changsheng from all directions. They all had different expressions. Beside His Eminence, Archbishop of the Education Board, Mei Shah, 2 chairs had appeared. Upon them sat 2 archbishops that appeared to be rather young. However, from their clothing, it could be seen that they were important figures on the same level as Mei Shah. It was unknown which of the orthodoxy's holy palaces they were in charge of. For some unknown reason, these 2 archbishops of the Holy Church had arrived at the Hall of Zhao Wan very late, giving off the feeling that they had specifically come to watch Chun Changsheng's match. Everyone within the Hall of Zhao Wan had different expressions, but the 2 archbishops were very calm, and collected. This was because they were well aware of the level of cultivation of the scholar from Scholarly Manor, Huaguang, or more accurately, Huaguang was the opponent that they had purposely chosen for Chun Changsheng. The drawing of lots for the grand examination had been secretly arranged by them. The abilities and details of Chun Changsheng's performance in the first match had already been privately leaked to Scholarly Manor through some of their subordinate clergy members. This was the reason why Huaguang had immediately used the regiment-shattering fist, a technique that consumed a large amount of true essence, in order to not give Chun Changsheng any chance. All of this was to ensure one thing. Chun Changsheng would definitely lose. Mo Yu looked at Chun Changsheng, who had already been pushed to the edge of the cliff, her thin eyebrows slightly furrowed, her hands holding onto the chair's armrests tighter. Prince Chen Lu glanced at her from the corner of his eyes, his suspicions growing deeper and deeper. He couldn't understand why. As the representative of the faction that wanted to suppress the Tradition Academy, she would be so nervous and concerned about the situation when Chun Changsheng was about to fail. Was she worried about Chun Changsheng? It didn't make any sense. In the next moment, he suddenly thought of something and thought that he had guessed Mo Yu's thoughts. During the Ivy Festival, when Princess Luo was fighting against Guan Fei Bai, she had used a simplified version of the Yeshur step. At that time, Go Hanshi had recognized it and shocked everyone. Why did Chun Changsheng know the demon race's top secret Yeshur step? This had always been an unsolved mystery. Although the footwork that Princess Luo had used during the Ivy Festival wasn't the complete Yeshur step, in battles at the level of the Ivy Festival and the Grand Examination, that simplified or perhaps modified version of the Yeshur step would be able to play a very important role. For example, when facing against the storm-like regiment-shattering fist, Mo, you must have recalled the scene from the Ivy Festival. She wasn't worried that Chun Changsheng would fail and get injured, but was worried that Chun Changsheng would use that simplified version of the Yeshur step and directly escape the range of the regiment-shattering fist, bringing an unexpected change to the match. That was what Prince Chen-Lu thought. If he could think of Chun Changsheng's simplified version of the Yeshur step, then the others in the Hall of Zhao, one would naturally be able to think of it as well. Su Shiji's expression was a little cold. Xue Xingchuan's body had once again returned to his seat, and the arena became a little silent. Everyone was clear that Chun Changsheng wouldn't immediately lose. This match should continue for a while. The two archbishops of the Holy Church remained expressionless. As representatives of the Orthodoxy's new faction, they knew a little more. Since they wanted to suppress Orthodox Academy, since they wanted to use scholarly manner to directly eliminate Chun Changsheng in the second round, how could they have missed out on this information? All the methods that Chun Changsheng could use, his opponent already knew beforehand. Or perhaps Huaguang was currently waiting for Chun Changsheng to use that simplified version of the Yeshur step and break out of the storm formed by the regiment-shattering fist. Huaguang definitely had an even stronger method hidden, waiting for the moment that Chun Changsheng came out. In the next moment, a series of surprised gasps could be heard within the Hall of Zhaowen. The two archbishops of the Holy Church frowned slightly. Looking at the scene within the mirror, they were a little surprised and confused. Chun Changsheng didn't use that simplified version of the Yeshur step. He didn't attempt to break out of the encirclement of the regiment-shattering fist. To be more accurate, he didn't do anything. His 2 feet were firmly planted upon the sandy ground, as if they were nailed to the spot, not moving an inch. Separated by those tens of terrifying true essence fist manifestations, he looked at Huaguang, who was opposite him, in silence. Time quickly passed. He didn't have to wait for long. The personages within the Hall of Zhao and the Li Palace clergy that were silently spectating from the second floor didn't have to watch for long. The regiment-shattering fist with its terrifying might had finally arrived before him, akin to a real storm, filling every corner of the space around him. A lot of people who saw this scene, whether it was Su Shiji or MOU, or the clergy on the second floor of the tower who had their hearts set on Orthodox Academy, were all extremely confused, not knowing what he was trying to do. This was a duel in the grand examination. There was no danger to his life. Logically speaking, there shouldn't be a scene of him giving up without putting up a fight, even if he admitted that he was no match. Why would he stand in the same spot and endure the torrential assault of the regiment-shattering fist? Confusion and doubt were the emotions of the majority of the spectators. Some are even feeling slightly disappointed, such as Prince Chen-Lu and MOU. At this point, Chun Changsheng had already lost. Huaguang's regiment-shattering fist had already taken form, forming a faint green line of wind and rain around Chun Changsheng's body. Within it was an innumerable amount of wind and rain, filled with a terrifying fist manifestation. Even if Chun Changsheng were to display the simplified version of discerning steps, he still wouldn't be able to break through the line of wind and rain formed by the regiment-shattering fist, unless he was able to display the true, complete version of discerning steps. But that was impossible. Spring had come to the capital, becoming Orthodox Academy's first student in over a decade, bringing forth countless storms, becoming first upon the first banner in the grand examination. Would all of this end at this moment? In the next moment, Chun Changsheng moved. When everyone thought he would move, he quietly stood in his original spot, not moving an inch. Just when everyone thought that he wouldn't be able to move again, he suddenly moved. He didn't use discerning steps. Instead, he directly charged towards the storm formed by the regiment-shattering fist. His movements seemed a little stiff and felt a little clumsy, but they were firm. Low cries erupted from the second floor of the Tower of Purging Dust. Some of the observing Li Palace clergy were shocked. Others were worried. At this moment, in the air surrounding his body, there were at least tens of fist manifestations, revolving like a hurricane. At the very front of every fist manifestation was a fist that glowed with a green light. Those fists weren't tangible existences. It could be said that they were fake. But the terrifying power contained within those fists couldn't be any more real. The storm formed by the regiment-shattering fists was very dense. as if there wasn't a single gap between them, unless the complete version of discerning steps borrowed the natural momentum to leap forward. Any other footwork or movement skill, no matter how exquisite, would come into contact with those fists, triggering the terrifying power contained within those fists. What's more, he wasn't using any footwork skills, he was simply charging forward. With a light paw sound, the new boot on his right foot shattered like snowflakes. The yellow sand suddenly scattered, revealing the stone floor beneath. Spiderweb-like cracks once again appeared. His body collided with the air, bringing with it a shrill howl. His body turned into a blur. The black dragon reappeared. After an extremely short period of time, the blur slightly paused. That was because a strong fist manifestation had struck his right shoulder. The dark-colored academy uniform was akin to a blossoming flower. With a hissing sound, the fabric scattered with the wind. The fist manifestation entered his body. The skin on his shoulder suddenly turned red, as if it was about to split open. At this moment, he had only taken 2 steps forward. It seemed as if he was about to stop. Then he was struck to the ground by the torrential storm of regiment-shattering fists. The second floor suddenly became silent. A light laugh rang out from within the hall of Zhaowen, carrying with it a faint sense of mockery. And Mo Yu didn't laugh. She looked at the scene on the mirror, her emotions somewhat complex. It was as if she could see the next moment. Chun Changsheng's right shoulder's flesh split open, his bones broken and blood flowing. Then he would be struck by even more regiment-shattering fists, spitting out blood and collapsing, thus losing and being eliminated from the grand examination. She could even see the lonely back of this youth leaving Orthodox Academy much later on. In that room within the small building, the bedding was cold. No matter how much calming incense was placed, it wouldn't have the same smell as before. She remembered the words that Her Majesty had said to her, suddenly feeling a little regretful, a little sad. A lot of people had the same thoughts as Mo. That's right, Chun Changsheng had displayed an astonishing defensive ability in the first match. But regiment-shattering fists were regiment-shattering fists. Even a perfect purification couldn't block it head-on. Prince Chenlu was silent. He was slightly angry at Chun Changsheng for not drawing his sword at the start. Su Shiji remained expressionless. His current status was a little awkward. Seeing Chun Changsheng suffer a crushing defeat, it wasn't suitable for him to reveal any emotions. Everyone had thought that Chun Changsheng would be heavily injured by the regiment-shattering fists. Yet, in the next moment, a miraculous scene appeared within the tower. The regiment-shattering fist landed on Chun Changsheng's right shoulder. His uniform instantly shredded, the color of blood faintly appearing. Yet, it only faintly appeared, before quickly returning to normal. A faint muffled sound rang out from his shoulder. That regiment-shattering fist dissipated like smoke, dispersed with the wind. Such a terrifying fist, yet it didn't cause him to bleed. How was this a falling stone that could break through the air, shatter the earth, and startle the birds in the forest? This was a cool breeze caressing a hill. This regiment-shattering fist was just scratching an itch for Chun Changsheng. Huo Guang's expression drastically changed. The second floor of the tower was filled with cries of shock. The hall of Zhaowen was silent. At this moment, Chun Changsheng's left foot landed on the ground. He continued forward, heading towards Huo Guang. His movement still looked clumsy, yet so terrifying. Chapter 152. A gust of wind fell upon the cliff's rocks, naturally dissipating. This was the feeling that the regiment-shattering fist gave off when it landed upon Chun Changsheng's shoulder. Of course, it couldn't really be a gust of wind. Therefore, his uniform was in tatters and his body, which had already transformed into a blur, was forced to pause for an instant. Only an instant. His left foot stepped upon the ground. His brand-new boot unsurprisingly shattered into shreds. Cracks once again appeared on the hard ground. Almost at the same time, numerous regiment-shattering fists landed upon his body. His uniform was heavily damaged, fluttering in the air. Several clear fist marks appeared on his body, but they didn't penetrate deep. From his scene at this moment, it didn't seem like the regiment-shattering fists had landed upon his body. Instead, It seemed like he had used his body to collide with those strong fist intents. A howl resounded once again. Chun Chong, Shung once again transformed into a blur, accompanied by deafening sounds of impact. He forcefully broke through the storm formed by dozens of regiment-shattering fists, disappearing without a trace. Only a single shredded boot remained upon the cracked ground, akin to a flower growing from a rock. The remnants of his uniform slowly floated down, akin to cotton floated down from the air. The Hall of Zhao, one could no longer maintain its silence. The sound of chairs being moved could be heard. And Mo Yu stood up. Looking at the scene on the mirror, her beautiful eyes were filled with shock. The principal of Star Caesar Academy was shocked speechless. The bishop of Temple Seminary beside him couldn't control his emotions and exclaimed out loud. Su Shiji's expression remained as indifferent as stone. It was impossible to tell what he was thinking. The two bishops that had just arrived at the Hall of Zhao were slightly moved. Xue Xingchuan's body once again leaned forwards, staring at the mirror, his expression becoming abnormally serious. No matter how perfect a purification was, it couldn't allow a cultivator's body to reach such a level of toughness, not even the demon race. Why was Chen Chongsheng's defense so terrifying? Even if he had a miraculous encounter, even if he refined all of the rare herbs within the 100-herb garden into pills and consumed them, he still wouldn't be able to achieve this. The people within the Hall of Zhao were all experienced and knowledgeable. The two bishops were the same as Meili Sha, members of the Orthodoxy's 6 prefects, but they had never seen such a thing. Chun Chongsheng's body was really unimaginably strong. It was completely incomprehensible. That was why they were shocked. That's right, Chun Chongsheng's defense was obviously not perfect. It couldn't possibly withstand the attacks of magic tools or sharp weapons. But this kind of basic ability was really a bit unimaginable. Xue Xingchuan was thinking a little more, so his expression was even more solemn, because he remembered a name that he hadn't heard for a long time. Zhou Dufu. For the past 1,000 years, he was publicly acknowledged as the strongest expert on the continent. Whether it was that demon lord who had sworn to rule over the continent, or Emperor Taizong, who was as dazzling as the sun, none of them could compare to this person in terms of individual strength. Even if one were to start from the moment the heavenly tomes descended into the world, Zhou Dufu could at least be ranked in the top 3. Many years ago, when Zhou Dufu was still a youth, he was far from being invincible in the world. However, at that time, he was extremely famous on the continent because he had a defense that was even stronger than a perfect purification. Everyone knew that it was because when he was an infant, he had once bathed in dragon blood due to some great opportunity. However, the continent had been peaceful for many years and the dragon race had already disappeared. For hundreds of years, not even a dragon could be seen. So where could Chun Chongsheng find the blood of a dragon? Xue Xingchuan didn't continue thinking about it, because that speculation was even more inconceivable than the physical strength that Chun Chongsheng had displayed. It was also because of the scene on the mirror that once again attracted all of his attention. Seeing Chun Chongsheng pouncing towards Huoguang like a blur, he understood why Chun Chongsheng hadn't moved from the very beginning. No matter how strong his defense was, it was impossible for him to withstand the endless bombardment of the regiment-shattering fist. Even if he could withstand it, he would definitely be injured, possibly even gravely. If that happened, even if he defeated Huoguang, he wouldn't be able to continue winning in the upcoming battles that were bound to be even more difficult. Therefore, Chun Chongsheng waited for his opponent to complete the regiment-shattering fist momentum, waited for the storm that covered the entire floor of the tower to shrink to a radius of around a few feet around himself. The regiment-shattering fist that had its momentum would definitely be stronger, but he only needed to break through one layer to break through everything. He needed to use the amount of regiment-shattering fist he could withstand in a single unit of time, to gain more time. Thus, in the entire battle, he would receive fewer punches. Xue Xingchuan's expression changed once again, thinking to himself, what a confident battle tactic. Chun Chongsheng was the focal point of the grand examination, including the 2 lords of the Holy Church. Many important personages had their eyes on him. Many, for example, Mou, thought that they had grasped all of his methods, or perhaps his trump cards. But in reality, no one knew what he actually possessed, not even his eminence, not even Luo. The regiment-shattering fist of the scholar from Scholartree Manor, Huaguang, was indeed terrifying. The timing of its usage was also extremely perfect. If it was in everyone's impression, even if it was him, who had the highest expectations for his strength, against such a strong and well-prepared opponent, he would still undoubtedly lose. But who could have guessed his current strength, the miraculous encounters he had experienced, were even more exaggerated than their wildest imaginations. Even he himself, at this moment, didn't know what he had experienced. He didn't know that he had bathed in dragon's blood. He could only make a few guesses from the changes that had occurred to his body, but he knew that he was very strong. The current him had at least 4 methods to break through the regiment-shattering fist that was like a torrential storm. He chose what seemed to be the most direct, and also the stupidest method, because no one would have thought of this method. Just like the battle between Tang 36 and Liang Banhu, he couldn't have guessed that Gohan sure would allow Liang Banhu to fight so stupidly. Tang 36 couldn't have guessed that Liang Banhu would actually fight so stupidly. He could have used discerning step to avoid his opponent's regiment-shattering fist. Yes, even if the regiment-shattering fist had already taken form, he could still avoid it because his mastery of discerning step couldn't be considered complete, but it also wasn't the discerning step that Luo had used at the Ivy League gathering. It was more profound and unpredictable than what people imagined. But he didn't use it. He could have pulled out the short sword at his waist, used the first form of Zhongshan sword of wind and rain, rising pale yellow, and directly faced the fist manifestation that filled the sky. But he didn't. Because this was only the second round of the grand examination, he still hadn't met those truly strong opponents. He couldn't reveal his strongest methods and trump cards. That scholar from Scholartree Manor, Huaguang, didn't have the qualifications for him to use those methods. In the blink of an eye, the regiment-shattering fist was broken, the situation reversed. Chen Changsheng was like a blur, instantly arriving before Huaguang. Huaguang was very shocked, but his level was far above that of the disciple from Huangshan Valley, adding on to the fact that disciples of Scholartree Manor placed great emphasis on calmness. When faced with this sudden change, he didn't panic in the slightest. Instead, he struck out with a fist. He didn't pull out his sword, because Chen Changsheng had arrived too quickly. This fist was the follow-up to the regiment-shattering fist he had previously used. It was the most natural, therefore the fastest. His fist wasn't aimed at Chen Changsheng, but at the ground. The fist manifestation was extremely clear. Only a light hum could be heard. The yellow sand in front of his feet danced. The fist manifestation serene within. Borrowing the recoil from the fist manifestation, he quickly retreated. The ochre-colored scholar's robes actually left behind several afterimages. It could be imagined how fast and how resolute he was in retreating. As he retreated, his right hand reached behind his shoulder, preparing to draw his sword. He had always been carrying this sword on his back. That sword was very large. Its shape was a little strange. It was actually curved in the middle. This sword was called Righteous Intent, one of the 7 swords that governed disciples of Scholartree Manor. It was extremely sharp and contained a world within. Although it couldn't enter the divine armament rankings, it was still an extraordinary item. He firmly believed that as long as he wielded this sword, no matter how terrifying Chen Changsheng's defense was, he would still be no match for him. He felt slightly regretful. Previously, if he had immediately pulled out the sword of righteous intent upon entering the tower and ignored that clergyman's suggestion, he wouldn't have ended up in such a sorry state. Before the sword of righteous intent, all ghosts would flee. He only needed one move, and he would be able to defeat Chen Changsheng. As he thought of this, his right hand had already grasped onto the sword's hilt. He only needed an extremely short amount of time to be able to draw the sword from its sheath. The act of drawing the sword was very simple. He had practiced it countless times. The amount of time required was so short that it could be considered as non-existent. However, time was an eternal existence that couldn't be destroyed. No matter how short it was, it still required a period of time. Huaguang's pupils suddenly contracted. Qin Chang, Sheng didn't give him this period of time. When Huoguang was outside the tower, he had received a message from Li Palace's clergyman, knowing that Chun Changsheng had displayed an astonishing speed in the first match. Regarding this, he had already mentally prepared himself and had made ample considerations when planning this match. Yet, he didn't think that Chun Changsheng's so-called astonishing speed was actually this astonishing. Chun Changsheng was too fast to the point that just as Huoguang's hand had landed on the sword's hilt, he had already arrived before him. The sword of righteous intent was unsheathed by half a foot. Chun Changsheng's fist was only half a foot away from his chest. Huoguang knew that he wouldn't make it in time. His face suddenly paled, true essence violently erupted, transforming into a sharp howl, bursting forth from his lips. At the same time, his right foot lightly stomped down on the ground. That's right, it wasn't a heavy stomp, but a light stomp. Even at such a tense moment, his footsteps were still light, as if he was stepping upon a cloud. Previously, when his fist had struck the ground, the sand that had floated up from the ground before him looked like a cloud. His right foot lightly stepped on the cloud formed by the yellow sand. Very light, very graceful, very mystical. It was as if he had also transformed into a cloud, floating upwards. What a vertical cloud! Sounds of praise rang out within the hall of Zhaowan. It was unknown if it was His Eminence from Temple Seminary or someone else, but they had actually started cheering for the students of Scholarly Manor of the South. One could imagine how much pressure Chun Changsheng's participation in the grand examination and that announcement had brought upon these people. As for the three teacher representatives from the southern sects, they had even more satisfied expressions, stroking their beards without saying a word. Huoguang's performance was indeed worthy of praise. A young cultivator that had yet to achieve ethereal opening was actually able to display Scholarly Manor's vertical cloud movement technique to such perfection. In such a tense moment, he was still able to display an air of serenity and serenity. It had to be said, Scholarly Manor's training of their disciples was indeed very impressive. More importantly, this movement technique, vertical cloud, could bring about a great turning point in this battle. Chun Changsheng was very fast, therefore he couldn't stop. His fist was very strong, therefore it couldn't bend. For something that was moving in a straight line to suddenly change direction, the faster the speed, the greater the amount of strength required, or an extremely high-level true essence manipulation technique. That type of technique was very rare within the various sects and academies of the continent. There weren't more than 3. Within the capital, there weren't any academies that possessed this type of technique. White Emperor City also didn't possess this type of technique. Even if Chun Changsheng wanted to learn it, he wouldn't know where to learn it. Therefore, his fist could only strike empty air. Huoguang, on the other hand, had already soared through the clouds. The two were about to reach a stalemate, with Huoguang wielding the sword of righteous will. The outcome of this match could perhaps be changed from this point onwards. Yet, in the next moment, the hands of the teacher representatives from the southern sects suddenly stiffened. One of the elders had even pulled out a few strands of his white beard. Within the hall of Zhaowan, cries of shock erupted. Chapter 153. Chun Changsheng's speed was indeed fast, his fist was indeed straight. Logically speaking, his fist would definitely have missed, unable to hit Huoguang, who was floating through the air using the graceful cloud stride technique. His fist had indeed missed. Upon landing in the air, it let out a buzzing sound, akin to an ancient bell being rung. The air that couldn't bear any force seemed to have been broken by this fist. Yet his fist didn't stop there, it continued to advance. Within the air that had been broken, a passageway seemed to have appeared. That passageway couldn't be seen with the naked eye, but it gave off a feeling that it was real. The personages within the hall of Zhaowan, upon seeing the scene on the mirror, could also feel the existence of that passageway. That passageway had been pierced through by Chun Changsheng's fist, but it wasn't straight. Rather, it was an arc, the front end slightly curved upwards. This formless line was very smooth, very beautiful. It had a natural beauty to it. How could a perfectly straight fist create a curved passageway in the air? There could only be one explanation. That was, at the last moment, his fist's manifestation had changed its direction. What fist style in this world could achieve this? Huoguang floated towards the sky. Qin Changsheng's fist followed that formless curve, heading towards the sky. A sword that burns the heavens. Shuexing Chuan's exclamation resounded within the hall of Zhao Wen. Indeed, there was no fist style that could change the direction of a fist manifestation at the last moment. The personages within the hall of Zhao Wen were all experienced and knowledgeable people. They were certain that there definitely wasn't such a thing. But there were sword styles that could achieve this, changing the direction of the sword manifestation at the last moment of a move. Previously, the personages within the hall of Zhao Wen had silently counted in their hearts. There were approximately 3 techniques in this world that could achieve this, one of them being this sword style. Li Shan's sword style's Burning Heaven Sword. Within the hall of Zhao Wen, the sound of chairs rubbing against the ground could be heard. The personages stood up in shock, looking at the youth on the mirror who was currently clenching his fist and thrusting it towards the sky. They were indescribably shocked. How could a student of Orthodox Academy learn the secret sword style of Li Shan's sword style? It was rumored that the Burning Heaven Sword of the Mount Li sword style was a secret sword technique created by the legendary Mount Li Jr. martial uncle. It was never shown to anyone until several hundred years ago, when he traveled the 4 seas and returned to Mount Li. Only then, under the bitter pleas of the current sect master, did he record this sword technique into the Mount Li sword style. This sword move was very famous, but very few people learned it, because this sword move was too difficult to learn, and it had a high requirement on the degree of condensing one's divine sense. In this generation of Li Shan sword sect disciples, it was said that only Qiushan Jun and Go Hanshi had learned this move. Now, this sword technique appeared in Qin Changsheng's hands. Instead of using a sword, he used his fists. The sword that burned the sky naturally became a fist that exploded the sky. Between his fist and the dark blue sky was Huoguang. Thus, before his fist could shatter the dark blue sky, it would first land on Huoguang's body. There was a muffled boom. It was the sound of a fist coming into contact with a body. Qin Changsheng's fist landed on Huoguang's chest. Concise, precise, and powerful. There was a second muffled boom. That was the sound of a body colliding with the air. Huoguang's body suddenly left the ground, flying towards the sky. After a moment, it became a small black shadow. Outside of the tower, the examinees were gathered before the stone steps, awaiting the result of this match. At this moment, they heard 2 consecutive booms. Due to the tower's soundproofing array, they hadn't heard any sound before. It wasn't like Tang 36 and Liang Banhu's match, where they were able to see the projection of sword intent in the dark blue sky. They couldn't help but look down on Huoguang and Qin Changsheng, who were participating in this match, until these 2 thunderous booms suddenly resounded, as if exploding right next to their ears. The examinees were incomparably shocked, following the booms and whizzing sounds of the air being torn apart. Their gazes shifted upwards, seeing the figure that was flying towards the sky. The arena was deathly silent. Many of the examinees had their mouths agape, but no one said anything. They could only watch as the figure flew to an extremely high place before descending once again. After a moment, a slight tremor could be felt from the ground. The examinees lowered their heads to look at their feet, then raised their heads to look at the tower. They were shocked to the point of being speechless, feeling as if their hearts were trembling along with it. That tremor, was that person's landing on the ground? Most of the examinees didn't clearly see who the figure that had been sent flying into the sky was, but for some reason, everyone subconsciously felt that it couldn't be Qin Changsheng. Within the tower of purging dust, Qin Changsheng's right foot was in front, left foot was behind like a bow. His right arm was slightly bent, his fist raised towards the sky like a torch. Huoguang had been sent flying. He retracted his fist, then retracted his right foot, straightened his body, and gazed towards the sky. His gaze moved upwards, then downwards, following the figure back into the tower. A muffled sound resounded. Dust rose up and the ground slightly trembled. The dust slowly settled. Huoguang had fallen to the ground, continuously spitting out blood. It was unknown how many of his bones had been broken. From the moment he had left the ground, the examiners from the second floor had rushed down, making preparations to save him. The clergywomen of the 13 divisions of radiant green continuously sprinkled clear light, helping to staunch his bleeding, ensuring that his life was in no danger. Only then would he be transferred to Li Palace. Lying on the ground that was covered in yellow sand, looking at the dark blue sky, Hua Guang's expression was one of pain. His eyes were filled with unwillingness and anger, but at most confusion. He didn't understand. Why did he lose this match? It must be known that before entering the capital, he had already known who his opponent was. If Chun Sheng couldn't even pass the martial trial, then he naturally couldn't participate in the dueling. If he couldn't even pass the first round of the dueling, then he naturally wouldn't have met him. All he knew was, as long as Chun Sheng entered the second round, then he would be his opponent. He would become a mountain that Chun Sheng couldn't surmount. Thus, at this moment, history would be corrected. The confluence of the North and South would once again return to the right path. However, he was currently lying on the ground. His injuries were too heavy. He couldn't move. He couldn't even do something as simple as turning his neck. He wanted to say something to Chun Sheng, but he couldn't look at Chun Sheng, nor could he say anything. He could only look at the dark blue sky. The sky within the education palace was much lower than the sky outside. He had previously thought that he would be able to touch that patch of sky. Just like how he had thought before entering the tower, he could easily defeat Chun Sheng. But in reality, the sky was untouchable. He also couldn't defeat Chun Sheng. Why? Chun Sheng could imagine how complex Hua Guang and the personages behind Hua Guang were feeling at this moment, how many thoughts they had, but he didn't think about it. Because other people's thoughts had nothing to do with him. Whether or not other people's arsenic was his honey, it had nothing to do with him. He would never waste his time on such pointless matters. He didn't look at Hua Guang, who was lying on the ground. He bowed towards the Li Palace clergyman that was hosting the dueling match, then walked out of the tower. The clergyman was from the education board. Looking at the youth's back, he nodded his head in praise. From entering the tower to leaving, Chun Sheng hadn't said a single word. Before the dueling began, Hua Guang had said that he wouldn't use words to humiliate him, because that would be senseless and uninteresting. He would simply defeat him. Chun Sheng had used reality to tell his opponent that speaking was a senseless and uninteresting matter. He had come to battle, not to chat, not to mention that they weren't familiar, they didn't even know each other. Similarly, before the dueling had begun, Hua Guang had arrogantly told him that if he didn't draw his sword, he wouldn't have the chance to do so again. Chun Sheng had used reality to prove that the person who truly needed to draw his sword was actually Hua Guang himself. The Hall of Zhaowen once again returned to silence. It took a long time for the crowd to suppress the shock within their hearts. Mo looked at the empty sandy ground within the mirror. The corners of her lips slightly twitched, as if she wanted to smile, but in the end, she still maintained her cold demeanor. Xue Xingchuan looked towards His Eminence, Archbishop Mei Sha. He had a lot of questions regarding the level that Chun Sheng had displayed. It was only at this moment that the crowd noticed His Eminence had unknowingly closed his eyes, as if he had once again fallen asleep. Only, the wrinkles on his face had smoothened out by a great deal. The old age spots that had originally been rather eye-catching had also lightened by a great deal. On his face, there was a faint hint of a smile. The Heaven Chosen Tale animation has already released 8 character designs. I've sent them over WeChat. Everyone could go take a look. The 8 characters are Chun Sheng, Suyu Rong, Tang 36, Luo, Daoist Ji, Yu Run, the Demon Lord and Her Divine Majesty. By replying to the character's name, you'll receive the corresponding image. Replying to Heaven's Chosen Tale animation character designs will receive a collection of 8 images. Those who haven't followed me can search for Fishy or Mountie1118 on the official account. The latter is easier to find. That's the WeChat official account. Friendly reminder, replying to the character's name within Nightfall will also receive a surprise. Of course, the official account should have many other things that everyone is interested in. That's right. I personally feel that Her Divine Majesty's drawing is a little too thin. A certain someone's chest is a little too small. I don't know what everyone thinks. Cough, cough. Chapter 154. The Burning Heaven Sword was a secret sword technique. Even the elders of the Longevity sect didn't know of it. Only disciples of Li Mountain could come into contact with it. Qin Changsheng had never been to Li Mountain his entire life. How could he know of this sword technique? For a normal person, this was difficult to explain. It could even become a riddle that would trouble them for the rest of their lives. But at this moment, the personages within the Hall of Zhao knew much more ancient stories than normal people. It didn't take long for them to remember something that had happened hundreds of years ago, during the war against the demon race. That event wasn't eye-catching on the vast battlefield, but it had an extremely profound effect on the subsequent developments. After that event, Li Mountain Sword Sect's Sword Arts Manual was sent to White Emperor City. According to the agreement, Li Mountain Sword Arts can only be kept by the White Emperor's family. It's strictly forbidden to be passed on to outsiders. How can Qin Changsheng learn it? Because Qin Changsheng is Her Highness teacher. That's possible? Then wouldn't this mean that all future students of Orthodox Academy can learn Li Mountain Sword Arts? If Her Highness thinks it's possible, then it's possible. If Li Mountain Sword Sect doesn't agree, then we can reason with His Majesty, the White Emperor. Not mentioning sword arts, how did Qin Changsheng achieve purification? How did his body become this strong? Without using tools or weapons, it's hard to break through his defense. What miraculous encounter did he have? Within the Hall of Zhao, many gazes fell upon His Eminence. Full of curiosity, they thought to themselves, could it be that the education board used some sort of secret technique? His Eminence didn't say anything. Currently, there are only 3 people in this world that could possibly know the truth behind Qin Changsheng's miraculous encounter. He was one of them. Mou was also pondering this matter. Just like what she had thought before, she knew that Luo had always lived within the 100 Garden. Qin Changsheng must be extremely familiar with the rare herbs within the garden. She knew that Qin Changsheng's teacher, Taoist Ji, was the continent's leading doctor, an expert in refining medicine. But this wasn't enough for Qin Changsheng's body to become this strong. Xue Xingchuan once again thought of Zhou Du Fu. But in the next moment, he shook his head, rejecting this conjecture, because this conjecture was far too absurd and unrealistic. The Grand Examination was one of the most important events in the continent, but to the VIPs, the main purpose of the Grand Examination was to select talents. Its true significance lay in the future, so they were very calm. They didn't need to observe from afar. They could calmly sit within the Hall of Zhao. The 2 archbishops of the Holy Church had arrived even later. However, this year's Grand Examination had brought them too many surprises and shocks. Go Hanshi and Tianhai Xingxue still had not made their moves. Princess Luo had not had the opportunity to display her strength in the first round, and Zhixiu was still hiding in his own grassland. It was already impossible for them to sit firmly in their chairs. Mou stood up and said, I want to go in and take a look. Xue Xingchuan, Su Shiji, and many other important figures within the hall all stood up and left the Hall of Zhao, heading towards the Hall of Clear Virtue, preparing to enter the Green Leaf world to closely observe the upcoming Grand Examination. The hall was empty, leaving only Mei Li Sha alone. This Archbishop of the Education Board, the leader of the Orthodoxy's tradition faction, slowly raised his head, looking at the sand-littered floor within the mirror, as if he was still looking at the youth from before, silent and expressionless, unknown whether he was happy or sad, unknown what he was thinking, giving off a feeling of great vicissitudes. A few months ago, on the last night of the Ivy League gathering, Qin Changsheng had been imprisoned in the derelict garden by Mou. He had then entered the Black Dragon Swamp on his own accord. He knew of this. He even knew that the Empress had been watching that night. He just didn't know what had happened after Qin Changsheng had encountered the Black Dragon that night. From the looks of it now, the real event should have happened not too long ago. Bathing in dragon's blood and being reborn, His Eminence's face revealed an indecipherable smile. That Black Dragon was actually willing to pay such a large price for you? What does she want from you? He had never held any hope for Qin Changsheng to place first upon the first banner. That announcement that had shocked the entire continent was only an attempt by him to increase the pressure on Qin Changsheng. Only pressure could allow Chen Changsheng to quickly mature. Now, from Chen Changsheng's performance, he had actually seen hope, though it was only an extremely faint sliver and the possibility was still extremely small. There was still hope. How could he not feel gratified? The tower of purging dust opened and Chen Changsheng walked out. In the first round, when he had walked out, his right boot had been completely shattered. This time, both of his boots had been shattered. He stood barefooted on the stone steps, his academy uniform in tatters, making him look like a little beggar. But no one had truly treated him as a little beggar. This time, everyone was truly shocked, especially after the Li Palace clergy announced that Hua Guang had been heavily injured, similar to Su Mou, being sent out of the education palace for treatment. The shock reached a certain peak. Previously, only Zhixio had been able to heavily injure his opponent under the watchful eyes of the Li Palace clergy. No one could have imagined that Chen Changsheng had also managed to do so. The question was, how'd he do it? Guan Fei Bai was very puzzled, asking, "This fellow was only a normal person during the Ivy League gathering. How many days has it been? How did he become so strong?" Gohan sure said, "I've said it before, he's not a normal person." Everyone's shocked gazes followed him to the woodlands. Xian Yuanpe gave a simple smile as he welcomed him. Chen Changsheng looked at him and forced a smile, saying, "I'll have to trouble you to support me." Luo, who was at the side, had a slight change in expression upon hearing this. Only now did she realize that although he appeared to be fine on the surface, he had actually received quite a heavy injury, to the point where even walking was a bit strenuous. She hurriedly went forward to support him. Arriving under the white poplar tree, he sat down, next to Tang 36, his brows slightly creased, appearing to be in some pain. Within the tower, when he had broken through the storm of fists, he had instantly received 7 blows of the regiment-shattering fist. No matter how strong his body was, it was still rather difficult for him to endure, especially the right side of his chest that had received an extremely heavy blow. His ribs hadn't been broken, but there should have already been some cracks. If he had used discerning steps, or directly unsheathed his sword, perhaps it would have been easier for him to obtain victory, and wouldn't have been so strenuous. It was the same as what he had thought the moment he had made his decision. His goal wasn't to pass the second round. His goal was to place first upon the first banner. Therefore, he had to make it to the final battle. He had to conserve his strength. Scholarly Manor indeed had a way of training their young disciples. Hua Guang had the ability to at least rank within the top 50 of the proclamation of Azure Clouds, but he was too arrogant and inexperienced. Perhaps he would underestimate his opponent. For the sake of the final goal, taking some risks was worth it. It's over. Now I really can't raise my head in front of you. Tang 36 had received quite a heavy injury during his battle with Liang Banhu. He had been resting against the white poplar tree. Looking at Chen Changsheng, who was beside him, thinking that this guy had actually entered the third round and had gone further than him, he couldn't help but feel a bit annoyed. He stuffed a crystal in his hand into Chen Changsheng's hand and said, "You're just lucky." That was true. How could Hua Guang be compared to Liang Banhu? Chen Changsheng smiled. Ignoring him, he looked at Luo, whose face was filled with worry, and said, "I'm fine, don't worry." Luo looked at his muddy feet. She hurriedly turned around and took out a new pair of boots, placing them to the side. She then took out a handkerchief from her sleeve. From her actions, it seemed like she was preparing to clean Chen Changsheng's feet. How could Chen Changsheng dare to let her do that? This wasn't Orthodox Academy's library. This was His Holiness Green Leaf World. Dozens of examinees and an even greater number of Li Palace clergy seniors were currently looking in this direction. He didn't want to be burnt to ashes by the fury of the crowd. He hurriedly took the handkerchief. "Your Highness, with the way he's fighting, you might need to prepare more boots." Tang 36 counted seriously and said, "There are still 4 rounds until the end. You should at least prepare 3 new pairs of boots." He said this to mock Chen Changsheng and Luo, the master and disciple. But unexpectedly, Luo laughed happily and said, "Thank you for your kind words." Tang 36 was startled. Only then did he realize that he subconsciously thought that Chen Changsheng would be able to reach the end. No need to prepare boots. In the next few rounds, I'll try not to be barefoot. Without waiting for Tang 36 to explain, Chun Changsheng said, then looked at Luo Luo and said, give up this round. Luo Luo had always listened to his words, but this time she didn't listen. I don't want to. Her answer was very straightforward, very determined, and even carried a hint of a little girl's coquettishness or pride. You can't beat him. Chun Changsheng looked at Tian Haishang Shui, stayed silent for a moment, and said, and he also gave me a dangerous feeling today. The three people by the woodlands didn't notice the word also, he said. Today, Tian Haishang Shui was very quiet, especially low-key, so he gave people a very strange feeling. Because his family background had determined that he couldn't be low-key. Among the examinees participating in this year's grand examination, besides Luo Luo, his background was the most profound and terrifying. Moreover, his personality had never been low-key and quiet. A low-key person, after returning from Yangshui Pass to the capital, the first thing he would do would definitely be to smash the gate of Orthodox Academy. But today he really was low-key. From the beginning of the grand examination until now, he had been silent, like a normal examinee, standing in the crowd. Even his expression didn't change. A lot of people noticed his silence. Chun Changsheng was the same. He felt that this was very dangerous. If the Wolf Tribe youngster Zhishio's gaze towards Luo Luo was the most dangerous feeling, then Tian Haisheng Shui's feeling was second, because both of them had the ability to defeat Luo Luo, especially Tian Haisheng Shui. As the Divine Empress' most valued grandnephew, he didn't stay in the prosperous capital to live the life of a playboy. Instead, he went far away to Yangshui Pass to battle against the demon race, because he yearned to become strong. Then, he actually broke through the life and death stage on the battlefield outside of Yangshui Pass, successfully completing his ethereal opening. In this year's grand examination, he and Gohan Shi were the strongest too. Luo Luo knew that she wasn't Tian Haisheng Shui's opponent, but she still insisted on fighting this match. Chun Changsheng stood up, his gaze following her as she walked to the tower. His expression was solemn. He was very worried. Tang 36 dug out a piece of hard bark from the poplar tree. Accurately smashing it against his head, he said, "You really don't understand why Her Highness wants to participate in the grand examination?" Chapter 155. Luo Luo could directly enter the mausoleum of books to view the monoliths, but she still pleaded with the Pope for an entire night. She still wanted to participate in the grand examination, even if she didn't care about her ranking. Why? This was because she wanted to clear the obstacles for her teacher, Chun Changsheng. In the dueling phase, every time she won an opponent, Chun Changsheng would have one less opponent. From this point of view, the stronger her opponent was, the more in line with her intentions. Especially Gohan Shi and Tian Haisheng Shui, who were publicly acknowledged to be the strongest. Even if she couldn't win against them, she wanted to make them expend a great deal of energy, at the very least, make them suffer heavy injuries. This way, when Chun Changsheng faced them, he would have a slight chance. So when she drew Tian Haisheng Shui in the second round, everyone was shocked. Only she herself was calm, and even somewhat happy. Chun Changsheng hadn't thought about why Luo Luo wanted to participate in the grand examination, but now that he was reminded by Tang 36, he thought about it and understood the reason. Therefore, he lowered his head and looked at the brand-new boots on his feet. After a long period of silence, he raised his head and said to Tang 36, "I will definitely win." Tang 36 looked at him and said, "You shouldn't say this to me, but to her." Chun Changsheng said, "I don't need to tell her. She already knows." Just as they were speaking, the door to the tower once again closed. Today, the grand examination would be held in the Tower of Purging Dust. It was destined that this tower's door would close many times, and would close many more times in the future. The creaking sound of the door hinge became more and more ear-piercing, but none of the previous times had attracted more attention than this one. This creaking sound was the clearest. This was the strongest battle since the start of this year's examination. One of them was the Princess of White Emperor City. Her bloodline talent was extremely powerful, and she was able to change the proclamation of azure clouds at the last minute. One was the grandnephew most favored by the divine empress, Tianhai Xingxue, who had successfully opened his ethereal opening in the bloody battle with the demon experts in front of Snowold Pass. Such a battle was naturally the focus of attention. The lonely youth who had been standing outside of the crowd, his back to the world, turned around to look at the tower of purging dust. In the depths of Wofu Zheshio's eyes that were like ice, a faint flame seemed to be rising. It was very quiet inside the tower. Tianhai Xingxue and Luoluo stood facing each other, calmly bowing, then straightening their bodies. No one made a move. The sunlight of the green leaf world shone on Tianhai Xingxue's face, making his skin whiter than snow. Luoluo stood quietly, her picturesque features still as beautiful as a painting in this picturesque world. Tianhai Xingxue quietly listened to the voices coming from the upper floor and suddenly laughed. She had to admit that his smile was somewhat charming. Luoluo naturally wouldn't be captivated, but she was a little confused. Why was it that Tianhai Xingxue didn't smile when they were outside the building? Why did he smile now? Many people want me to fight with your highness, because in the dueling phase of the grand examination, the only people who can defeat you are me and Gohan Shi. Compared to Gohan Shi, I seem to be more suitable to fight with you, because even if I were to truly injure you, the White Emperor and his wife would not be too angry at me for the sake of the Empress. Tianhai Xingxue looked at her and smiled, saying, "That's right, many people want to borrow my hand to eliminate your highness, the strongest fighter in Orthodox Academy. As for your intentions, I'm very clear. You just want to protect and escort Qin Changsheng. But I'm a little confused. Even if you can defeat everyone, how can you guarantee that he will continue to win?" Luoluo said, "As a disciple, I must do everything that I can, no matter how far my teacher can go." Somewhat interesting. No, it's very interesting. The smile on Tianhai Xingxue's face gradually faded. He was calm, even a little apathetic, and said, "Unfortunately, this dueling phase is the idea of the two archbishops of the Orthodoxy. It's the idea of my family. It's the idea of certain people in the palace, and the idea of many others, but they have never considered my idea." In a quiet room within the tower, there were 10 or so chairs arranged in a row. The two esteemed archbishops of the Orthodoxy's Holy Church sat at the east and west ends. Mou and Prince Chen Lu sat in the center. Xue Xingchuan, Su Shiji, the bishop of Temple Seminary, the principal of Star Caesar Academy, 3 representatives from the southern sects, and a few other important personages, all sat in their respective chairs. In this year's grand examination, those young cultivators had brought too many surprises and shocks. These important personages wanted to observe from a closer distance, to ensure that no problems would arise. Therefore, they had come to the tower from the hall of Zhaowen. The first match that they were about to witness would also be the strongest match. This was also one of their objectives. The duel between Her Highness and Tianhai Xingxue could proceed, and a winner could be determined. But it definitely couldn't be like Zheshio's match against Su Mou, or Qin Changsheng's match against Huoguang, where the examiners in charge of controlling the scene were caught unprepared and unable to react in time, resulting in the examinees sustaining heavy injuries. This was the promise that they had made to His Holiness and the Tianhai clan. Yet, they didn't think that this match that had attracted countless gazes would, from the very start, enter an unexpected rhythm. It was as unexpected as Tianhai Xingxue's silence and low profile in today's grand examination. There was no whipping of wind and rain, nor was there snow enveloping the northern pass. Only Tianhai Xingxue's calm voice incessantly resounded within the tower. That's right. No one had considered Tianhai Xingxue's intentions. This was the collective will of the Tianhai clan. Hearing Tianhai Xingxue's words, the expressions of the 2 archbishops of the Holy Church, as well as some other important personages, changed slightly. What do I mean? It means to pursue. Of course, I have my own pursuits in life, or rather goals. Tianhai Xingxue glanced towards the second floor, then retracted his gaze, looking back at Luoluo, continuing to calmly and attentively say, All these years, the capital has always said that I'm jealous of Prince Chunlu because he was able to stay in the imperial palace since he was young, being able to study with Mou from the kingdom of Ping. But actually, they're all wrong. The one I'm truly jealous of is Mou. The world only sees the Empress' trust in her, the power and glory bestowed upon her. But they've been blinded by that radiance, unable to see that she's already at the star fusion realm at such a young age. The star fusion realm, all these years, everyone has been talking about Su Yurong, Qiu Shanjun. A few years ago, everyone was talking about Wang Pe, talking about Xiao Zhang, but very few people have thought about how strong she really is. In the gloomy room on the second floor, many gazes fell upon Mou. Her expression was indifferent, as if the person Tian Hai Xing Shui was talking about wasn't her at all. That's right, I'm the one with the most potential in the field of martial arts in the Tian Hai clan. Everyone thinks that the reason I've returned from Young Shui Pass to the capital to participate in the grand examination is to obtain first upon the first banner, but Qiu Shanjun didn't come. Even if I obtained first upon the first banner, what meaning would there be? Could it prove that I'm stronger than Mou? Tian Hai Sheng Shui suddenly stopped speaking, remaining silent for a long time, before continuing, "Fine, even if I defeated Qiu Shanjun, it still wouldn't prove that I'm stronger than her. And if it was the me of the past, I would probably be willing to work hard for first upon the first banner in the grand examination, because after all, that is glory." Luo looked at him in confusion, asking, "Don't you think so now? What's the purpose of cultivation? It's strength. What's the purpose of strength? It's to live, to obtain even more power, and to obtain even more." Tian Hai Sheng Shui looked at her and calmly said, "The me of the past would think that first upon the first banner in the grand examination was very important. It would at least help me gain some confidence when facing Mou. But now, to me, the most important thing in the grand examination is that I will meet your highness, and you need me to fail." After saying this, he once again looked towards the second floor and said with a hint of arrogance, "What I'm about to say next, I suggest you all not hear it, or else it will also be troublesome for you all. See you tomorrow." Chapter 156. Tian Hai Sheng Shui and Luo stood amidst the yellow sand beneath the tower of purging dust. The combined power of their family backgrounds was enough to intimidate everyone on the second floor. Of course, the people on the second floor were also important figures, but his warning was very clear. Moreover, those important figures were from different camps and belonged to different powers. They were all in the same room and looked at each other, so even if they wanted to listen, they could only choose not to. The room was very quiet, very quiet. The light from a sky outside the window was not very bright. And Mou, who was sitting on the chair in the middle of the room, was silent for a moment. She closed her eyes with an indifferent expression, as if preparing to take a short rest. In fact, she was using this action to express her attitude. She was not prepared to listen to Tian Hai Sheng Shui's next words. Xuexing Chuan frowned slightly, and the two archbishops of the Holy Church also slowly closed their eyes. Following a few soft sounds, the wooden fence outside the window flipped, and the sky suddenly became dim. The soundproofing array was activated, and the noises downstairs could no longer be heard. As for the otherly palace clergymen, they presumably did not have the guts to eavesdrop and thought of ways to turn themselves deaf. After a while, Tian Hai Sheng Shui didn't bother to confirm whether or not anyone was eavesdropping, nor did he care about these matters. He looked towards Luo and continued, "Using first upon the first banner in the grand examination to prove my strength is meaningless towards my survival and gaining greater power, so I can give up." Luo said, "First place on the first banner is a rare glory. It can increase your position in the Emperor's heart." And then, Tian Hai Xingxue expressionlessly said, "Of the young people of the Tian Hai clan's third generation, I was originally the most outstanding person. What benefit does becoming even more outstanding bring to me? My father and his brothers are the ones who will decide the fate of this family." Luo looked at him and asked, "So you're prepared to use first place on the first banner to exchange for something you need?" Tian Hai Sheng Shui replied, "Correct. This is why I said earlier, to me, The most important aspect of the grand examination is that I will encounter your highness, and your highness needs me to fail. Luoluo thought about it and asked, "What do you want?" Tian Hai Sheng Shui calmly looked at her and said, "I hope to be able to exchange for your highness's friendship." Luoluo didn't even think and directly said, "No." Tian Hai Sheng Shui said in a self-mocking tone, "It seems that the surname Tian Hai has indeed incurred the wrath of the heavens and the resentment of the people." Luoluo said, "No, I just think that friendship cannot be exchanged. It can only be cultivated." "That makes sense." Tian Hai Sheng Shui's expression turned serious. "Then can I have the opportunity to cultivate a friendship with your highness?" Luoluo said, "I can't make the decision on this matter. I have to listen to teacher." Tian Hai Sheng Shui thought for a moment. Qin Chong Sheng probably wouldn't have any good impression of him. So he asked again, "Your highness, do you have any cousins?" Luoluo was extremely intelligent. So how could she not understand what he meant? Puzzled, she said, "My cousins are both in the Great Western region, but if I remember correctly, you're going to be marrying Penguin next year, right?" Tian Hai Sheng said, "You should know very well that Ping likes Qiushan. What's the point of me marrying her? Besides, marrying her will only make me die faster." Luoluo understood what he meant. After thinking for a while, she said, "I can't decide on this matter. I have to listen to my parents." "Then, what can I exchange from your highness?" Tian Hai Sheng Shui asked with a slight frown. Luoluo was also somewhat vexed, saying, "I really don't know." Tian Hai Sheng Shui looked towards the tightly shut window on the second floor and suddenly said, "A promise." Luoluo's expression became slightly stern, saying, "When that time comes, I might not have the ability to fulfill my promise." Tian Hai Sheng Shui calmly said, "I believe in your highness' moral character. When the time comes, as long as you truly attempt to fulfill your promise, I will acknowledge it." Luoluo said, "You're at too much of a disadvantage." Tian Hai Sheng Shui said, "Using something that you don't have to exchange for something that is worth pursuing, even if it only exists in the future, it's still worth it." Luoluo suddenly felt some sympathy for him, asking, "Why do you have to do this?" Tian Hai Sheng Shui smiled, appearing a little lonely, saying, "Perhaps this is the price of maturity." After saying this, he turned around and walked out of the tower. Luoluo looked at his back and felt a little emotional. Not everyone born into the royal family was as fortunate as she was. Of course, she also had her own misfortunes, or perhaps difficulties, but they had yet to arrive. Tian Hai Sheng Shui was undoubtedly an intelligent person. He used a duel in the grand examination to exchange for some sort of guarantee for the future. It was just as he and Luoluo had said in the end. Why did it have to be like this? It had to be like this. The wooden fence was flipped open, sunlight once again shone in, sounds once again entered the quiet room. It was the sound of Tian Hai Sheng Shui's departing footsteps. Complete silence. No one knew what Tian Hai Sheng Shui and Princess Luoluo talked about. In reality, even if they heard the conversation, they wouldn't be able to ascertain what sort of agreement Tian Hai Sheng Shui and Luoluo had reached. Everyone present was an important person. All of them had sufficient intelligence. It was just that aside from Prince Chen Lu, the others didn't have the same background as Luoluo and Tian Hai Sheng Shui, so it was very difficult for them to understand their greatest fear. They only saw Tian Hai Sheng Shui directly leave, giving up on this duel. Mou glanced at the two sacred church bishops with serious expressions, thinking to herself, Tian Hai Sheng Shui's surname is Tian Hai. How could he be used by you? Even his father wouldn't be able to. Tian Hai Sheng Shui directly left the education palace, not continuing to participate in the grand examination. In any case, his results in the academic exam were at least top 5. No one would dare to push him out of the top 3. The Li Palace clergyman stood on the stone steps, reading, Orthodox Academy, Princess Luo, undefeatable. Undefeatable? This matchup between experts that attracted the attention of many actually didn't proceed. Tian Hai Sheng Shui actually directly withdrew from the competition. The examinees outside the tower were all shocked. They didn't know what had happened within the tower. Luo returned to the woodlands. Chen Changsheng looked at her, asking in confusion, "What happened?" The expression on Luo's small face was a little perplexed. Not the perplexed kind of the unknown, but rather a perplexed kind of feeling. She looked at Chen Changsheng and said, "Sir, I promised him that I wouldn't tell anyone, including you, father and mother. I'm sorry." Chen Changsheng was startled, saying, "It's fine, then don't say anything." The second round of the dueling phase of the grand examination had officially concluded. What followed was the third round, which would determine the top 16. The third round was also decided by drawing lots. However, this round was different from the second round. The drawing of lots for this round wasn't as stressful. Examinees that entered the third round could basically be confirmed as the top 3 in the grand examination. Only their final ranking mattered. Examinees that were satisfied with being able to enter the top 3 naturally didn't care who they would draw next. The rest of the examinees had lofty ambitions. Wanting to enter the first banner would eventually have to face a strong opponent. Therefore, it didn't really matter who they drew next. Examinees that had lost the second round, apart from Su Mo Yu and Huoguang, who were heavily injured and unable to continue battling, as well as Tian Haixing Shui, who had mysteriously conceded, all of them remained on the field, preparing for the additional matches that would follow. Outside the tower, there were still 61 examinees. The examinees' gazes, for the most part, fell upon the woodlands, upon the group from Orthodox Academy. Whether or not those important figures within the orthodoxy would still tamper with the drawing of lots, arranging difficult opponents for Her Highness and Chen Changsheng was the only thing that everyone present was curious about. After Tian Haixing Shui's departure, the only person that had a chance of defeating Her Highness was Gohan Shi. There was another matter that made the examinees nervous. That was who would draw that wolf tribe youth, Zhixiu. Though it really didn't matter who they drew in the third round, there was definitely no one that wanted to face Zhixiu. Losing in a humiliating manner was one thing, but the crux of the matter was that this youth was far too cold-blooded and ruthless. Suffering heavy injuries would be bad. The Li Palace clergyman quickly pulled out the slip of paper with the pseudonym of Zhang Ting Tao. Zhixiu's opponent was Guan Fei Bai. Zhixiu's face remained expressionless, appearing especially cold and detached, but from his calm gaze, it could be seen that he was very satisfied with this opponent. Guan Fei Bai didn't say anything, remaining very silent. His current mood couldn't be seen. The battle between third and fifth on the proclamation of Azure Clouds. A bloodthirsty wolf tribe youth from the snowy plains against Li Shan Sword Sect's Divine State's 4 laws. No matter which title it was enough to make this match exciting, to the point that those examinees that originally didn't care about the drawing of lots let out cries of surprise. The cries of surprise didn't stop. In the next moment, they suddenly grew louder. This was because Liang Ban, who had met Qi Jian. What sort of tempo was this? Gohan Shi's expression became rather grave. In the next moment, he drew a young expert from Star Caesar Academy. The examinees discussed amongst themselves. In the second round of the grand examination, they had suppressed Orthodox Academy, and in the third round, they were going to move against Li Shan Sword Sect. In this round, Chen Changsheng and Luo's opponents were both relatively weak. But amongst those who had set their sights on first upon the first banner, their luck wasn't the best. Heavenly Academy's Zhuang Huanyu had faced opponents in 3 consecutive rounds. All of them were relatively weak. Zhong Hui from Scholarly Manor was a similar case. Gohan Shi entered the Tower of Purging Dust. This was the first time he had stepped onto the stage since the start of the grand examination. After Tian Haixing Shui's departure, amongst the examinees, his strength was the highest. This match was naturally very attention-grabbing. Yet, this match proceeded very calmly, very normally. It could even be said to be a little too calm. Not long after, the door to the Tower of Purging Dust opened. Gohan Shi and the young examinee from Star Caesar Academy walked out from within the tower. Whether it was his body or that Star Caesar Academy youth, there wasn't a single trace of blood to be seen. It seemed as if they hadn't been injured. Not even a speck of dust. It was as if a battle had never occurred between the two. The victor was naturally Gohan Shi. I'm not his match. The difference is too great. Luo looked at Gohan Shur, who was walking towards a stream bank. She felt a little admiration, but also a little uneasy. She said, even if I were to achieve ethereal opening at this moment, my chances aren't great. What nonsense are you thinking about? Chun Chang Sheng said, he's my opponent, not yours. Gohan Shur's first appearance was unexpectedly calm. Qi Jian and Liang Ban, the internal strife between Li Shan's sword sect disciples, was even more unexpected. This match was unexpectedly intense. The Tower of Purging Dust soundproofing array had no way of concealing the mournful and terrifying cries of swords. In the dark blue skies, countless crisscrossing sword manifestations appeared. Even standing outside the tower, one could feel the power and danger of those two swords. What was most unexpected was that the final victor was not Liang Ban, but Qi Jian. Chapter 157. The Tower of Purging Dust opened, and Liang Ban and Qi Jian walked out. The clergy of Li Palace announced that Qi Jian was the victor, causing an uproar amongst the crowd, but they themselves didn't have much of a reaction, whispering to each other, as if they didn't care that their clothes were riddled with wounds. Bloodstains were everywhere, and the remnants of holy light healing still lingered between their sleeves. They walked down the stone steps and towards the stream, continuing to whisper along the way. Some examinees who were closer could hear that these two brothers were actually discussing the previous duel. You didn't use this move correctly, senior. You used that move too slowly. These past few years, the Divine State's 7 laws were the idols or goals of many of the younger generation of Shioja cultivators. The battles between these 7 disciples of Li Shan's sword sect were spread throughout the world, becoming a topic of discussion for many. Just like the time when Qi Jian lost to Zhuang Huanyu by 1 move because it was a rare defeat for the Divine State's 7 laws, it was discussed over and over again. But very few people had seen the battle between these two brothers. It wasn't until today that people finally understood why the younger generation of Li Shan's sword sect was so strong, and why the Divine State's 7 laws were so dazzling. In a battle between fellow disciples, they didn't hold back, but they didn't hold grudges because in their eyes, this was a common occurrence. To do such a common occurrence every day was extraordinary. How could Li Shan not be strong? Tang 36 looked at the 4 disciples of Li Shan's sword sect by the stream and said with some disappointment, so losing to Liang Ban, who was a matter of course, Qi Jian is also far stronger than me. Losing and being stronger here wasn't referring to strength, but something else. Chun Chang Sheng said, we can learn from them. Tang 36 glanced at him and said, how? Didn't you notice that Liang Ban, who was happy even though he lost, he was truly happy? At the grand examination, they can use their swords to their heart's content, without worrying about being crippled or dying. This makes them very happy. And so, I'm not that kind of monster. I can't learn, I admit defeat. From entering Li Palace early in the morning to entering the Education Palace within the Green Leaf world, from the Hall of Zhao went to the Tower of Purging Dust, the number of Li Palace clergymen that appeared before the examinees weren't many. But in reality, the entire Li Palace, or more accurately, the entire orthodoxy, was in service for the grand examination. There were many clergymen that the examinees couldn't see doing various kinds of work. It was very difficult to die in the grand examination. As he once again entered the tower, Chun Chang Sheng intentionally looked upstairs. He didn't see anyone. Then he saw his opponent. In the 3rd round, his opponent was a little girl. She was precisely the junior sister of Holy Maiden Peak, who had ridiculed and humiliated him on the divine path, Yi Shaolian. Holy Maiden Peak was the same as the Longevity sect. They were both one of the 2 major sects within the orthodoxy of the South, having many sects under their jurisdiction. Yi Shaolian came from Gentle Stream Temple. In the information provided to Orthodox Academy by the Education Board, it was clearly stated that this little girl's cultivation talent wasn't bad. Once she was of age, she could directly enter South Stream Temple. Of course, she could only enter the outer sect to cultivate. No matter how good her cultivation talent was, Yi Shaolian was still too young. As one of the youngest competitors in the grand examination, her cultivation level was very unstable. Logically speaking, it would be very difficult for her to enter the third round. But her luck in drawing lots was extremely good. Her first round victory was extremely smooth. In the second round, her opponent was a commoner student that could only participate in the grand examination by passing the preliminary examination. Her cultivation level was similar to her opponent's, but her true essence wasn't as deep as her opponent's. In the end, she had to rely on the magic tool that she carried with her to luckily win the match. After exiting the tower, she threw herself into her senior's embrace and cried, unable to contain her joy. In the third round, she heard Chun Changsheng's name. She knew that her good luck had finally come to an end. Yi Xiaoyan looked at Chun Changsheng. Her young and tender face was filled with nervousness and unease, her face slightly pale. That day on the Divine Avenue, she had called Chun Changsheng a toad that wanted to eat the flesh of the phoenix. She had always believed that Chun Changsheng was a useless piece of trash, but who could have guessed that Chun Changsheng would actually win 2 rounds in a row? And in the previous round, he had even defeated Scholarly Manners Huoguang. This was different from her extremely good luck in drawing lots. He had obviously relied on his own strength. Yi Xiaoyan knew that she wasn't Chun Changsheng's match. Thinking of how she had previously offended this person, she became even more nervous. At this moment, the examiner's voice came from the second floor. "If you're ready, then begin." Chun Changsheng looked towards Yi Xiaolian, nodding his head in acknowledgement. Being glanced at by him, Yi Xiaolian couldn't help but feel afraid. The rims of her eyes slightly reddened, and her dress slightly trembled. Chun Changsheng was slightly startled, thinking to himself, what's going on? Yi Xiaolian was truly afraid. Her body couldn't stop trembling. The string of bells on her wrist also began to tremble, giving off a clear ringing sound. The clear ringing of the bells caused her to become slightly more clear-headed. She gathered her courage and threw the bells on her wrist towards Chun Changsheng. She was separated from Chun Changsheng by a distance of over 10 meters, but the string of bells had actually arrived before Chun Changsheng in an instant. This string of bells was Gentle Stream Temple's magic tool. The bells of Sanskrit. It couldn't be compared to a legendary level magic tool like the 1,000-mile button, but still possessed an extremely powerful might, not much weaker than the umbrella that Luo Luo had faced in the first round. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been able to rely on this magic tool to directly defeat her opponent in the second round. It was unknown what kind of metal this string of bells was made from. The strings faintly contained a swift and forceful sword intent. The clear ringing concealed a certain aura that could interfere with the cultivator's true essence circulation, but Yi Xiaoyan's luck seemed to have truly been used up in the first few rounds. Her current opponent, Chun Changsheng, was most lacking in true essence. He also didn't need true essence to battle. His right hand formed a fist and punched forward. Then his fingers spread out in the air, like a blossoming flower, accurately grabbing onto this string of bells of Sanskrit. The bells of Sanskrit incessantly trembled in his hand, looking as if it was struggling, transmitting a massive force to its surroundings. At the same time, the aura that interfered with the circulation of true essence became increasingly forceful. The circulation of true essence within Chun Changsheng's body was indeed greatly affected, but the problem was, even if the bells of Sanskrit didn't do anything, his true essence circulation was originally difficult to smooth. His meridians were originally broken. He didn't use true essence, only his physical strength. He was able to tightly grasp this string of bells of Sanskrit in his hand. Dang! 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 The bells of Sanskrit violently trembled, struggling, wanting to escape from his grasp, but ultimately failing. After a few breaths of time, the bells of Sanskrit finally calmed down, stopping within his palm. Seeing this scene, Yi Xiaoyan had completely forgotten that she was in the middle of a battle. Using her hand to cover her mouth, she was extremely shocked. The bells of Sanskrit were given to her by a teacher from Gentle Stream Temple. She was very clear on how much power this string of bells of Sanskrit carried when it danced. It was very hard to control. She had thought that Chun Changsheng would have many methods to easily cause the bells of Sanskrit to lose their effect, but she never could have imagined that Chun Changsheng would actually use his palm to directly grasp the bells of Sanskrit. The clear ringing of the bells disappeared. The tower was silent. Yi Xiaolian was shocked speechless. She didn't make any further movements. Chen Chongsheng also didn't continue. He gripped the string of bells and looked towards the second floor. The room on the second floor was still quiet, unknown if it was due to the shock of Chen Chongsheng's inhuman strength or some other reason. No one spoke. And Mo Yu's expression was indifferent as she said, "Do you really think he would humiliate a little girl? He's not Tang Tang." These words revealed some hidden intentions and also made a conclusion. A Li Palace clergyman appeared by the second floor's railing, looked towards Yi Xiaolian and asked, "Admit defeat?" Yi Xiaolian nodded. The rims of her eyes were slightly red. Chen Chongsheng placed the bells of Sanskrit on the sand by his feet, turned around, and walked out of the tower. He didn't say any malicious words to this little girl who had once humiliated him, nor did he pay attention to her. Yi Xiaolian blankly stared at his footsteps, suddenly feeling a little helpless. She had previously prepared herself to be defeated by Chen Chongsheng and then humiliated, but she didn't expect that he wouldn't do so. Exiting the tower, Chen Chongsheng returned to the woodlands. Yi Xiaolian returned to her senior's side, lifted her sleeve, and wiped her tears. "Have tender feelings for the fairer sex?" Tang 36 looked at Chen Chongsheng and sneered. "Then what kind of person would I be?" Chen Chongsheng asked. "Then if it was you, what would you do?" Tang 36 thought about it and found that he couldn't do anything. He didn't like that little girl named Yi Xiaolian. He could be harsh with his words because arguments relied on words, cultivation methods, lung capacity, and shamelessness. But he couldn't really say that he would beat her up, right? Wouldn't that be bullying the weak? Next up was Luo Luo. Of the 4 scholars from Scholarly Manor that participated in the grand examination, only 2 remained. Her opponent for this match was the other person apart from Zhonghui. She and that scholar from Scholarly Manor entered the tower. Footsteps could be heard from the second floor. A few important personages came to the window to observe the match. They were really curious as to what level Her Highness had reached to be able to cause the Council of Divine Ordinance to specifically change the proclamation of Azure Clouds. In the first round, Luo Luo's opponent was too weak, causing Tian Haishang Shui to directly forfeit in the second round. Then she would have to fight in this round, right? Luo Luo untied the falling rain whip from her side, looked at the scholar from Scholarly Manor and said, "You first." In Orthodox Academy, she was respectful and well-behaved towards Chen Chongsheng, occasionally acting coquettishly, but in front of others, her bearing was completely different. Previously, at the Ivy League gathering, whether it was Heavenly Academy's professor or Li Mountain's elder Xiao Songgong, they weren't even worthy of her attention, let alone this scholar from Scholarly Manor. She didn't purposefully look down on him, nor did she have an overbearing air. She was only graceful and calm. Her tone was indifferent, yet she had an air of nobility and might. The scholar's expression slightly changed. He slowly unsheathed his long sword from its sheath. His movements were slow, but the sound of the long sword leaving its sheath was extremely crisp. A clang, a bright flash of the sword, in an instant, traversed a distance of over 10 meters, arriving before Luo Luo's eyes. Luo Luo's eyes didn't even blink. Her eyelashes didn't even tremble. Rising yellow. The falling rain whip in her hand wildly danced. Zhongshan's sword of wind and rain was imbued with an incomparably majestic, true essence. Easily annihilating the flash of the sword, it then charged towards the scholar from Scholarly Manor. The Education Palace was a miniature world. The reaction of heaven and earth was even more sensitive. Following her display of Zhongshan's sword of wind and rain, a strange phenomenon appeared in the dark blue skies. A dark cloud floated over from an unknown place, enveloping the entire tower. Then it began to rain. Just like before the match began, the black eaves of the tower were once again washed. She was using the falling rain whip. The raindrops were the tip of the whip. The raindrops fell upon the eaves, falling upon the yellow sand, making pitter-patter sounds. It was like the sound of a whip striking a person's body. The rain gradually increased in intensity, a torrential downpour. Within the tower, The curtain of rain was dense, making it impossible to see anything. Occasionally, a flash of a sword would flash, but it was instantly swallowed up by the torrential rain. After a moment, an extremely clear sound resounded within the tower. "Ha!" The torrential rain suddenly stopped. The scholar from Scholartree Manor powerlessly collapsed in a corner, his body covered in wounds, blood and rainwater mixed together. His face was pale, his slightly blue lips slightly trembled, and his eyes were filled with despair. That was the despair of being crushed by an absolute power. A few days ago, I wrote Gentle Stream Temple as Tiger Stream Temple. I'll find some time to change it. 2. When the sacred sound bell clangs, everyone knows what song I want to sing. 3. Yi Xiao Lian blankly stared at Chen Chongsheng's footsteps. She was actually so helpless. She was a child, so of course this was that song. See you tomorrow. Chapter 158. The torrential rain abruptly stopped. The clear light once again shone upon the ground beneath the tower of purging dust. The yellow sand beneath had been washed away by the rain, creating a ravine that resembled the famous highland in the northwest, bordering the sea. The scholar from Scholartree Manor was lying in a corner, his long gown drenched by the rain and blood. Luo retracted her whip, quietly standing in her original spot, as if she hadn't made a move. Her noble air was evident, her dominance unparalleled. "Her Highness, she's only 14 this year, right?" The principal of Star Caesar Academy stood by the window. Looking at the scene below, he sighed, "This is a bit too exaggerated." It was indeed exaggerated. It wasn't that Luo's methods in this match were exquisite. On the contrary, her attacks weren't exquisite at all. They were like a torrential storm, relying on her absolute strength to crush her opponent. Extremely simple. This was what it meant to be the Emperor's hegemony within the storm. If Luo were to encounter an opponent of the highest level, such as Gohan Shi, who had already completed his ethereal opening, she naturally wouldn't be able to suppress him in such a tyrannical manner. But against cultivators of the same level, whether it was in terms of true essence quantity or purity, or in terms of berserk output, her absolute superiority made her nearly invincible. The White Emperor's clan's bloodline talent was indeed tyrannical to the extreme. The personages watching the match from above were all shocked speechless, thinking to themselves that the Council of Divine Ordinance's evaluation was indeed correct. Within the younger generation, aside from Suyu Rong and Qiu Shanjun, no one else had the qualifications to compare their bloodline talent to Her Highness. At this point, the dueling phase of the grand examination was finally beginning to reach its climax. The show was about to begin. After Luo defeated the scholar from Scholartree Manor, it was immediately followed by the battle between the Wolf Tribe youth, Zhixiu, and Guan Fei Bai. This battle had attracted everyone's attention. Chen Chongsheng was no exception. He was even more concerned than the other examinees. Tian Haisheng Shui had already withdrawn from the competition, causing him to feel uneasy. The only person that could threaten or harm Luo was Zhixiu. The door to the tower once again closed. The match had begun. The battle between Zhixiu and Guan Fei Bai had entered its most intense phase right from the start. The tower of purging dust soundproofing formation was instantly broken. The examinees outside the tower didn't even have the time to mentally prepare themselves before they heard one sound after another, one louder than the other. Some of the examinees with slightly weaker spiritual senses instantly paled. Their seas of consciousness were almost shaken by those sounds. Those loud and clear sounds were not the sounds of slapping, nor were they the sounds of collisions. There was a certain sharpness to them. It should be the sound of swords cutting through the air. The Southern Diplomatic Mission had been in the capital for a long time, and the 4 people from the Lishan sword sect had attracted a lot of attention. Now, many people knew that Qi Jian used the legendary sword of the Lishan Commandment Hall, while Guan Fei Bai used a very ordinary sword that was only worth 5 taels of silver. Hearing the mournful sound of the sword, the people outside the building were shocked. To be able to use an ordinary longsword that was only worth 5 taels of silver to emit such a bright sword cry, Guan Fei Bai's true essence must be extremely vigorous. What was even more shocking was the Wolf Tribe youth, Zhixiu. Without a weapon, just what method was he using to resist that terrifying sword? The sword cries became increasingly mournful. The world within the education pagoda reacted. The clouds in the blue sky began to slowly move, constantly changing shape. At one moment, it was like a craggy cliff. At another, it was like a turbid wave crashing against the shore, sword intent crisscrossed within, extremely somber. Yet, the shape of the clouds couldn't be maintained for long. It was as if the wind was howling within the wilderness, or as if a pack of wolves were howling. Outside the tower was deathly silent. Many examinees were shocked by the scene and sounds they heard. Their faces paled. They couldn't imagine, if they were in the tower at this moment, whether it was facing those sword moves that were crisscrossing through the clouds, or those terrifying and mournful howls of the wind. What else could they do besides immediately conceding and surrendering? The expression on Chun Changsheng's face also became more and more serious. During the Ivy League gathering, Guan Fei Bai had once tested sword moves against Luo Luo. Although he hadn't used his true essence at the time, he could clearly see that this person was extremely talented and had painstakingly cultivated. His skill in the way of the sword was extremely outstanding. It was rumored that within the Divine State's 7 laws, his skill in the way of the sword was second only to Qiu Shanjun. This was very reasonable. Yet, it was clear that he still had no way of suppressing his current opponent. Just how strong was that wolf tribe youth called Jixiao? After an unknown amount of time, the howls of the swords gradually faded. There was also no longer any howls of the wind. What followed was a creaking sound. The door to the tower opened. Jixiao walked out from the tower, his face slightly pale, his expression still as apathetic as before, his cold eyes devoid of any emotion. He didn't seem human at all. He walked down the stone steps. His speed was slightly slow. Every time he lifted his knee, there seemed to be some problem. It was only now that people noticed that there was a faint stain of blood on his left knee. After a moment, a stream of blood flowed down his trousers to his ankle. He didn't wear shoes, remaining barefooted. Therefore, this stream of blood could be seen very clearly. Soon after, Guan Fei Bai also walked out of the tower. His posture was still tall and straight. His clothes that had been washed to the point of faintly whitening didn't have any tears, nor were there any traces of blood. It seemed as if he hadn't been injured. People watched as he walked towards the side of the stream. They were a little shocked, thinking to themselves, could it be that Guan Fei Bai had won so easily? Jixiao walked to the grass outside of the crowd, sat down, and began to regulate his breathing. He closed his eyes, ignoring the discussions coming from all around him. His sitting posture was a little strange. He wasn't sitting cross-legged, but on his own ankles, it looked more like he was squatting. At this time, Guan Fei Bai walked to the side of the stream. He looked at Gohan Shi, preparing to say something. Gohan Shi shook his head, indicating for him not to speak. He raised his right hand. His fingers were like the wind, quick as lightning. He tapped on Guan Fei Bai's chest 3 times, injecting a stream of true qi into him. Guan Fei Bai's face slightly reddened, then turned pale. This repeated 3 times. Then with a piu sound, he spat out a mouthful of blood. This mouthful of blood splattered on the grass by the side of the stream. With a chi-la sound, the grass withered at a speed visible to the naked eye, then fell off. There was an uproar. Only now did the examinees realize that he had actually suffered such a heavy injury. He had only endured it until now. Only then did his injuries erupt. The mouthful of blood that he spat out had no poison, only remnants of Jixiao's fierce, true essence. If Gohan Shi hadn't acted in time, that Jixiao's true essence might have been concealed within Guan Fei Bai's body. Even so, at this moment, his face was pale, extremely haggard, as if he had just suffered a serious illness. Thinking of how that wolf tribe youngster had acted so viciously, Liang Ban, who looked over, his gaze slightly cold, Qi Jin's small face flushed red with anger. Guan Fei Bai wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, saying, "You can't blame others for being inferior." Gohan Shi patted his shoulder, expressing his consolation and praise. At this time, the Li Palace clergyman appeared on the stone steps, announcing, "Star Caesar Academy. Zhang Ting Tao wins." At this point, The third round of the dueling tournament had ended. Outside the Tower of Purging Dust, it was silent. No one cheered, not even the sound of discussion. This was because everyone could already foresee that the dueling tournament would become more and more intense. Naturally, it would also become more and more bloody and cruel. Under this somewhat oppressive and uneasy atmosphere, the top 16 of the dueling tournament were decided, immediately following which was the fourth round of the dueling tournament. What no one could have imagined was that Jishio would immediately enter the stage again. His opponent was another young expert from the Mountain Sword Sect, Qi Jian, consecutively encountering two strong opponents, with no time to rest between the two matches. Even though this was the result of drawing lots, it was still somewhat unfair. If it was a normal examinee, perhaps they would ask the examiners to give them some time to rest, but Jishio still didn't say anything, his expression indifferent as he walked into the Tower of Purging Dust. It was very quiet inside the tower. The battle had already ended. Jishio looked at the yellow sand in front of him, as if he had returned to his home during the summer. Past Deer Cry Slope was a river. There were soybeans and sorghum growing there. One didn't need to hunt and could still fill one's stomach. But no matter how fragrant the sorghum was, it still couldn't compare to the fragrance of meat. I am a wolf from the north. A wolf travels 1,000 miles to eat meat. This is a matter of course. Even though you're still a child, since you're an opponent, of course I have to be merciless. Why are you so angry? He looked at his opponent for the first time. His indifferent face revealed some emotion. This emotion was hard to describe. It was very strange. Qi Jian stood in front of him. His black hair had scattered during the battle, draping over his shoulders, making him seem even thinner and weaker. General Stream Temples, Yi Shaolin, Orthodox Academies, Xin Yuan Pe, and him. They were the three youngest participants of this year's grand examination. His face was very young and tender, currently filled with anger. Jishio couldn't understand Qi Jian's anger, thinking about the few moves he had used in close combat, even though they were somewhat sinister, but a battle was a matter of life and death. So what if they were sinister? Could it be that the elders of your Lishan Sword sect didn't teach you how to fight? Previously, your senior's performance was much more carefree and at ease than yours. Previously, after he had used those sinister moves, for some reason, Qi Jian flew into a rage, no longer being as cautious as before. His true essence erupted. Dozens of sword moves were unleashed in a frenzy, like a madman, tangling with Jishio. If Jishio hadn't walked the line between life and death for so many years, he really would have been hacked to death by Qi Jian's sword. If Gohan sure knew of his junior's performance, he would definitely be very gratified. Even a monster like Jishio, thinking about Qi Jian's fire-like frenzy of sword moves, felt some lingering fear. Sometimes, anger was truly a type of power. Regrettably, anger was a power that couldn't be sustained for long. Qi Jian's frenzy of sword moves didn't manage to kill Jishio. Jishio still obtained the final victory. Exiting the tower, Qi Jian walked up to Gohan Sure. His lips were slightly puckered and his eyes were slightly red, appearing extremely wronged. What happened? Gohan Sure slightly raised his eyebrows. It was obvious that this was the first time he had truly become angry. Qi Jian wiped away his tears and said, "It's nothing, senior. You have to help me get revenge." Gohan Sure glanced at the distant Jishio and said, "Okay." The Wolf Tribe youth, Jishio, had won 2 matches in a row, consecutively eliminating 2 of the Divine State's 7 laws. This shocked many. But what truly shocked everyone was that Chun Changsheng had won again. In the first 3 rounds, Chun Changsheng's opponents had been too weak in the first and third rounds. In the second round, he had encountered Scholartree Manor's Huoguang. Although Huoguang was strong, he hadn't entered the proclamation of Azure Clouds. Many people couldn't accurately judge Chun Changsheng's level. In this round, his opponent was a young expert from Shuang City. This young expert from Shuang City was ranked in the 20s upon the proclamation of Azure Clouds. Just when everyone thought that the story of Chun Changsheng's participation in the grand examination would come to an end, he once again shocked everyone, defeating his opponent. Everyone found it hard to understand how he had won. "I'm too hungry. I'll first eat something before writing. The next chapter will come later." Chapter 159. Due to his betrothal with Su Yu Rong, after the Ivy League gathering, Chun Changsheng had naturally become the focus of the capital. The announcement that His Eminence had made on his behalf was akin to adding oil to the fire. Countless people were inquiring about everything related to him. His age, origin, grievances with the divine general's estate, as well as his level of strength were all no longer secrets. Therefore, people were very shocked and wanted to know what had happened to his body in the past few days, allowing his strength to increase by leaps and bounds, allowing him to win 4 rounds in a row in the grand examination and enter the final list. Xian Yuanpo looked at Chun Changsheng. His mouth was wide open, as if he had seen a monster. Tang 36 stared at his eyes and asked, "What did you actually eat?" "We eat together at Orthodox Academy every day. Did you secretly give us special treatment? Or did you steal something good from the 100-herb garden and didn't tell us?" Within that quiet room within the tower, the personages were also discussing Chun Changsheng's performance today. Could it be that he had just used the complete version of discerning steps? Someone asked Su Shiji. If Fei Jian or Jin Yulu, those elderly people, were present, having experienced the great battle against the demon race, they would have been able to clearly identify what Chun Changsheng's previously unpredictable movement technique was. Currently, within the room, only Xue Xingchuan and Su Shiji, the two who had been to the northern battlefield, could possibly know. Su Shiji's expression was indifferent. He said, "I haven't met anyone from the Yishe tribe at the front lines. According to intelligence, for the past several hundred years, the majority of the Yishe tribe within Old Snow City had been recruited into the intelligence agency by that mysterious Lord Blackrobe, rarely appearing. Xue Xingchuan's troops had previously captured 2 spies from the Yishe tribe. The member of the Yishe tribe that had attempted to assassinate Her Highness, Luo Luo, during spring, was currently imprisoned within the Forbidden Army's prison." He thought about Chun Changsheng's previous movement technique, shook his head, and said, "It's not the complete version of discerning steps, but it's already somewhat interesting." The crowd understood what he meant. The complete version of the discerning step had some meaning. In a battle between Yus like the grand examination, it would be able to play a very important role. Xue Xingchuan thought for a while, then said, "His speed and movement technique have reached the pinnacle. Coupled with his decent luck in lots, being able to enter the top 8 is understandable, but I don't think he can continue advancing." The top 8 of the dueling phase of the grand examination had already been decided. There were young experts like Gohan Shi, Zhuang Huanyu, Zhong Hui, and Zhixiu, whose names had already spread far and wide. There were also a few unexpected candidates, such as a girl from Holy Maiden Peak who did not reveal herself, and a student from Star Caesar Academy who even the Board of Ecclesiastic Education didn't pay much attention to. The most unexpected was still Chun Changsheng. Up until now, he still hadn't been eliminated. This already exceeded everyone's imagination, and it didn't seem to make any sense. This doesn't make sense. How could this be? Why hasn't he been eliminated yet? The list of the top 8 for the dueling phase of the grand examination was sent outside of the Education Palace, written outside of the Hall of Zhao, Wen's Mirror of Light, and also to the crowd outside of the palace. The sky was currently nearing dusk. The warm rays of the setting sun shone upon the stone pillars, as well as upon the citizens of the capital who had come to watch the spectacle, as well as upon the tourists that had come from other places. At this moment, there were at least a few thousand people surrounding the palace. The noise was very noisy. The shouts of those peddlers had long since become very hoarse. Yet at this moment, everyone was talking about the same thing, expressing the same emotions. That matter was Chun Changsheng's for consecutive victories. That emotion was one of shock, confusion, and anger. The citizens of the capital didn't like Chun Changsheng, but compared to the examinees from the south, they didn't hate Chun Changsheng anymore. The reason why they were so angry at Chun Changsheng's 4 consecutive victories, apart from being shocked, was purely because Chun Changsheng's performance had caused them to lose a lot of money, to the point where some people's eyes had already turned red from the loss. That's right. Aside from first upon the first banner, there were many other betting methods for the grand examination. Of the examinees that participated in the grand examination, there would be victors and losers in every round. Similarly, After every round, there would be many citizens that would become victors or losers. Due to Chen Changsheng, this year, the majority of the citizens were losers. For every round of the grand examination, the outside world would give out different payout rates. In order to make it easier for the citizens to place their bets, Chen Changsheng's payout rate was extremely high in every round. Up until now, his payout rate was still the highest. Today, he had caused some people to go wild with joy, but caused even more people to lose money. Yet, no one believed that he could continue to win. Tian Haixing Shui was in a tea house to the south of Li Palace, quietly watching the crowd before Li Palace. He suddenly said, "If the four great markets are still willing, I'll bet 5,000 gold on Chen Changsheng's final victory." The old caretaker standing beside him was startled. He said with some hesitation, "Young master, he can't possibly win, right?" Tian Haixing Shui said. In the first round, everyone believed that he couldn't win, yet he won. In the second round, no one believed that he could win, yet he still won. The third round was the same. The fourth round was the same. Before the grand examination, who would have thought that he could enter the top 8? Since that's the case, why can't I bet on him? The old caretaker repeatedly voiced his agreement. Tian Haixing Shui suddenly thought of something, saying, "If he really does end up taking first upon the first banner, take the winnings and repair Orthodox Academy's gates." The old caretaker thought to himself, "Wasn't Orthodox Academy's gates broken by you, young master? Furthermore, Orthodox Academy has never repaired its gates. Everyone in the capital knows what this means. If you were to repair Orthodox Academy's gates, wouldn't that be the same as admitting defeat?" He was very surprised, but thinking that the young master's actions must have a deeper meaning, he didn't dare to say too much. He was only a little puzzled by the details. If Chen Changsheng really wins, then it'll be a large sum of money, even if I were to repair Orthodox Academy's gates. It wouldn't be worth that much money. Tian Haixing Shui gazed at the Li Palace under the twilight, indifferently saying, "If he really does win, then what harm is there in gifting him a white jade gate?" The old caretaker became even more puzzled, thinking to himself, even if Chen Changsheng takes first upon the first banner, that youth is the symbol of Orthodox Academy, a symbolic figure used by the Orthodoxy's conservative faction to challenge the Empress. No matter what, the Tianhai clan wouldn't accept him as a disciple. "Why are you doing this?" Tian Haixing Shui didn't explain. He picked up the teacup and took a sip, suddenly feeling that it was a little bland and tasteless. Qiu Shanjun didn't come. Mo was still ahead. The grand examination indeed didn't hold much meaning for him. But to give up just like that, he couldn't help but feel a little conflicted. The Divine General's estate. Within the quiet reception pavilion, Madame Su looked at the middle-aged woman in front of her, her eyebrows slightly creased as she asked, "Granny Hua, did you hear wrong? He really entered the top 8? Granny Hua said in a low voice, "It shouldn't be wrong. The four great markets have already put out the odds for the next round. Young Master Chen's name is indeed on it." Madame Su was shocked speechless, feeling a great headache. If that kid really did obtain first upon the first banner, what should she do? She looked at the chairs and empty tea table within the reception pavilion, remembering the scene of her first meeting with Chen Changsheng at the beginning of spring last year. That young Taoist was a little reserved, very clean. He didn't drink a single sip of tea. Madame Su's mind suddenly moved, thinking of a certain possibility. Within the East Wing, Shuang Er, who had just received the news, was also extremely shocked. She recalled the scene of her first meeting with Chen Changsheng in the rear garden. She couldn't imagine that reserved young Taoist from the countryside, that trash that couldn't cultivate, had actually entered the top 8 of the dueling phase. According to the rumors of his performance at the Ivy League gathering, his results in the academic phase must have been extremely good. Didn't this mean that he was only a step away from entering the first banner? That's right. As long as Chen Changsheng could win another round in the dueling phase and enter the top 4, combined with his results in the academic phase, he had a high chance of entering the first banner. The problem was, could he still continue advancing? Or was this the end? Deep within the Imperial Palace, there was a small side hall, extremely cold and cheerless, akin to a deserted palace. The black goat stared at the green fruit on the tree beside the stone steps, hesitating for a long time whether to eat it or not. It remembered very clearly that last time in the Hunter garden, that youth had fed it a fruit that tasted pretty good, but it couldn't confirm whether that was the fruit's own taste, or if it was because the skin of the fruit carried a scent. Nanny Ning silently walked past it and said in a low voice, "Young master, Sheng Shui has forfeited." The divine queen was holding a piece of fragrant wood. The edges of the wood were currently burning. Upon the wisps of smoke floated a pill. Her fingers slowly moved the wood. The smoke from the burning wood lightly swirled, causing the pill to slowly revolve. Hearing this, her fingers slightly paused, causing the pill to also stop floating in the air. Her expression changed slightly. After a moment, she understood and said emotionally, "The children of the Tian Hai family are still promising." This was a good thing, but also a bad thing. The more promising the children of the Tian Hai family were, the more she couldn't completely let go. Thus, the Zhou dynasty would be unable to escape from that huge problem. But she still felt somewhat relieved. Nanny Ning hesitated for a moment and continued. Tradition Academy's Chun Chong Sheng entered the top 8. The divine queen's eyebrows slowly rose. Nanny Ning was a little nervous. She really liked that child Chun Chong Sheng and was worried that the queen would be unhappy. The divine queen didn't say anything. In the next moment, she appeared in the pitch-black underground. She lightly waved her sleeves. The thousands of luminous pearls on the ceiling lit up. The slightly cold white light fell on the frosty ground, illuminating the entire scene. A little girl in black clothing with a snowy face was weakly lying on the ground. The divine queen lightly flicked her finger. The pill fell in front of the little girl. Chun Chong Sheng hasn't been eliminated yet. Your blood is still somewhat useful. The little girl in black struggled to raise her head and stare at the divine queen. Without fear, only annoyance, she said, "What kind of demonic pill is this?" The divine queen calmly said, "Motherwort ointment." The little girl in black knew that a terrifying human like the divine queen, if she wanted to punish her, she would have countless methods. She definitely wouldn't do something to a pill, so she unhesitatingly swallowed the pill. Chun Chong Sheng. Can he get first upon the first banner? She looked at the divine queen and asked curiously. "Let's stop here," the divine queen calmly said. In the next moment, she arrived at the abandoned well at New North Bridge. With her hands behind her back, she looked at the stars in the night sky and remained silent for a long time, not knowing what she was thinking. "Let's stop here for today. I thought about it again. See you all tomorrow." Chapter 160. The Education Palace was the Pope's green leaf world. There should also be day and night in this world, but during the grand examination, they couldn't see day and night, so examinees could only rely on their senses to guess what time it was in the real world. They didn't know that it was already late at night outside, but fatigue and drowsiness still hit them as expected. Before the 5th round of the grand examination, there would be an additional round from 33rd to 64th place. Apart from Tian Hai Xing Shui and a few examinees who were too heavily injured to continue, the remaining 20 examinees still had to put in a final effort for their final ranking in the grand examination, but before this there would be a period of rest. The clergy of Li Palace distributed food, water, and elixirs to the examinees. With Luo's arrangements, Orthodox Academy's food was naturally more sumptuous. The 4 of them sat by the woodlands, eating while discussing the upcoming matches in low voices. There wasn't much to say about Tang 36 and Xian Yuan Po's matches. The main point was to analyze the opponent for Chun Chong Sheng. Go Hanqi's performance was calm and collected, giving people a feeling that he was so strong that he couldn't be defeated. Besides him, the wolf Youth Shishio was unquestionably the most dangerous opponent. Even though he had fought 2 fierce battles with Guan Feibai and Qi Jian, expending a great deal of energy and even sustaining some rather serious injuries, he still could not be underestimated. If Chun Chong Sheng wanted to obtain first upon the first banner, these 2 people were the 2 peaks he had to surpass. Thinking up to this point, Tang 36 suddenly lost interest in this matter, because no matter how he looked at it, Chun Chong Sheng couldn't win against these 2 people. He gazed at the stream bank and suddenly said, Don't you feel that those 4 people from Mount Li are very similar to the 4 of us? The 4 members of the Mount Li sword sect ate and chatted by the stream, the atmosphere seemingly pleasant. Far away from the crowd, Zhixio was also eating. As he ate, he was very silent, his movements very slow, and he seemed especially serious, as if the ordinary food provided by the Li Palace were the most delicious delicacies in the world. Tang 36 looked in that direction and mocked. I thought this wolf cub couldn't eat. Xian Yuanpa didn't understand and said, How can you not eat? Tang 36 said, I thought he only ate ice and snow, chewed jerky, or drank blood. Chun Chang Sheng said, It's a monster. Tang 36 asked seriously, Don't you think he's a monster? Xian Yuanpa thought for a moment before he shook his head and said, I think it's all right. Tang 36 ignored him and turned around to ask, Chun Chang Sheng, you can't beat him, right? Chun Chang Sheng thought about it and said, Maybe. Tang 36 turned to the distant Zhixio and suddenly said, I suddenly have an impulse. Chun Chang Sheng asked curiously, What impulse? Tang 36 said, The impulse to make friends with this wolf cub. Chun Chang Sheng stared at him for a long time and confirmed that he was serious. He couldn't help but be surprised. After thinking for a while, he said, Does he look like someone who needs friends? Before the start of the grand examination, there was a sea of people outside of Li Palace. Zhixio gazed at the morning sun alone and entered the hall of Zhaowen. He immediately left the venue of the academic examination, walked alone through the sea of trees, crossed the river, and stood in the pavilion atop the mountain, his back facing all the examinees, lonely as if he had lost his mother. Would such a person need friends? Don't you think he's very lonely? Tang 36 looked at Chun Chang Sheng and the others and asked. What he said here was lonely, not lonely, not lonely. It was just a lonely word, which made it seem even more lonely. Chun Chang Sheng was startled and said, Anyone can see that, so I don't think he needs friends. Tang 36 shook his finger and said, My opinion is the complete opposite of yours. I think a lonely person like him needs friends the most. Xian Yuanpa asked curiously, You want to be friends with Zhixio? Can't I? Tang 36 asked back. Chun Chang Sheng's gaze fell upon the outskirts of the crowd, looking at the wolf tribe youngster who was silently eating with his head lowered. After a moment of silence, he said, I thought you didn't like people like him. Tang 36's gaze followed him and also fell upon Zhixio. He said, Yes, imitating loneliness and pretending to be desperate. I used to do this a lot. I hate that kind of me, so of course I don't like him. Chun Chang Sheng retracted his gaze, looked at him, and asked, Then why do you insist on being friends with him? Tang 36 said, If he becomes our friend, how can he be so cruel to you and Princess Luo Luo? Xian Yuanpa couldn't help but sigh. The elders in the tribe were right. Humans are all bad people. Not a human. Chun Chang Sheng corrected him. It's a human named Tang Tang. Tang 36 didn't want to argue with him. He stood up, patted off the grass on his butt, and said, There's no harm in trying. He can't just kill me in front of so many people. Luo Luo didn't say anything until now. She softly said, Master is right. Lonely people don't necessarily need friends, at least. Wolf Zhixio isn't that kind of person. Chun Chang Sheng glanced at her, but didn't say anything. Tang 36 picked up the half-roasted chicken that wasn't eaten yet from the table, took 2 pieces of oiled paper and wrapped it up, then walked towards the outskirts of the crowd. The conversation between the people from the Tradition Academy didn't attract much attention, but he suddenly left the woodland, and, judging from the direction he was going, he was probably going to Wofu Zhixio, which instantly attracted everyone's attention. The examinees were very surprised. They didn't know what he was going to do, and the girls from the 13 divisions of Radiant Green and Holy Maiden Peak all had worried expressions on their faces. In the eyes of these girls, no matter how harsh Tang 36's words were, no matter how arrogant his actions were, he was still a noble prince. No matter how quiet Zhixio was, no matter how much he did for humans and Yao, he was still a cold-blooded monster with hands stained with blood. Seeing him walking toward Zhixio, they couldn't help but worry. This world that only cared about appearances wasn't fair. The 4 people from the Lishan sword sect who were eating and chatting by the stream were also surprised. Guan Fei Bai looked at Tang 36 with a slightly strange expression and asked, "What is this guy planning to do this time?" At the Ivy League gathering, Tang 36 scolded Li Shan too much. He didn't have a good impression of him. Qi Jian looked at the wolf tribe youngster at the outskirts of the crowd. His nostrils flared and his breathing became heavy. He seemed to be very angry. Gohan sure didn't quite understand. He thought to himself, just what happened in the battle between Junior and Jushio to make him so angry? The stone field in front of the Tower of Purging Dust was extremely large. There were trees and a small stream. The place where Jushio sat, however, didn't have anything, only a flat rock. Tang 36 walked up to the rock and looked at Jushio, who was kneeling in a strange posture or perhaps squatting on the ground. He suddenly felt hesitant. Jushio didn't pay attention to him. He silently ate. Tang 36 silently looked at him. After a while, he suddenly said, "If other people were to notice the details of your eating, they would definitely think that you are very scary." Jushio drank a mouthful of the fruit juice provided by Li Palace, then raised his head and looked at him. From the start of the grand examination until now, Tang 36 was the first person to initiate a conversation with him. Tang 36 looked at him and said, "The speed at which you eat is very slow, not very generous, more like a young lady in her chambers. When you chew very seriously, 12 times when you chew rice, 30 times when you chew beef. This isn't very interesting. It only proves that you have too much self-discipline. In other words, you are very strict with yourself." Jushio quietly looked at him. His eyes were devoid of any emotion, but he also didn't lower his head and continue eating, ending this one-sided conversation. Perhaps it's because there's too little food on the snowy plains, or perhaps it's because there's a lack of doctors and medicine, and there's also no female clergyman from the 13 divisions of Radiant Green to help treat your injuries, so your life is very difficult. You treasure all the food you can get, but you definitely won't overeat or drink too much in order to avoid any problems with your body. In that sort of place, even a normal stomach ache can make one wish they were dead. Tang 36 said, "But I don't think that this is very scary because I've seen someone very similar to you. That person also pays attention to all the details of life. I've often thought people like you, people who are afraid of death, should really get to know each other." He was obviously referring to Chun Changsheng. Jushio followed his finger and looked towards the woodlands. After a moment of silence, he lowered his head and continued eating, no longer paying attention to him. Tang 36 placed the paper bag in front of him and opened it, asking, "Do you need friends?" Inside the oil paper bag was half a roast chicken. The half-roast chicken only had one drumstick. It had already been given a luo by Chun Changsheng, so it was a little incomplete, and having been left out for a while, the roast chicken was a little cold. The chicken oil had congealed on the surface of the chicken skin. It didn't look too good. The most important problem was roast chicken really wasn't a healthy food. But for some reason, after seeing this roast chicken, Jushio actually opened his mouth to speak. Since the beginning of the grand examination, he had only spoken 2 sentences, and the vast majority of people hadn't heard them. No one knew what his voice was like. Only now did Tang 36 know that his voice wasn't hoarse or unpleasant to listen to. It didn't have any resemblance to the wolf's howl of legend. Jushio's voice was very cold. The speed of his speech was very slow. The gap between each word was rather long, like a child that had just learned how to speak or a mute that had suddenly learned how to speak. He looked at Tang 36, his face expressionless, and said with extreme slowness, "My fate offends the heavenly cursed lone star, destined to be alone for the rest of my life. Therefore, I have no friends." There were countless stars in the sky, or perhaps there was a star far away from the sea of stars, in a corner that was easily overlooked, extremely lonely. Or perhaps that star was really called the heavenly cursed lone star. Or perhaps the fated star lit by Jushio really was that heavenly cursed lone star. But regardless of whether this was true or not, the indifference in his words was very clear. He didn't need friends. He wanted to keep everyone at a distance of 1,000 miles. If it was a normal person, perhaps at this moment, they would retreat in the face of difficulties. But Tang Tang wasn't a normal person. He was a chatterbox. After getting to know Chun Changsheng, and, especially after officially entering Orthodox Academy, this hidden trait of his was fully released. Not having friends doesn't mean I don't need friends. What do you think of me? He looked at Jushio and said with sincerity,